Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Daniel Clearwater, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 17 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, you name it. I grew up right here in Gatlinburg, so these hills are in my blood. My mama used to tell me stories about the old mountain folk, families that lived way back in the hollows and never came down. I always figured they were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. That was before October of 1976, before Shadow Mountain taught me that some stories aren't stories at all. It started on a Tuesday morning when the fog was so thick you could barely see your own hand. I was getting ready to brief some new trainees about backcountry safety when Chief Ranger Williams called me into his office. He had that look on his face, the one that meant trouble. "We got 3 missing hikers," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Been gone 2 days now. Last radio contact was Sunday evening from Blackberry Hollow." I knew that area well. 22 miles from the nearest road, tucked way back between Shadow Mountain's peaks. It was pretty country, but rough. Dense rhododendron thickets that could hide a grizzly bear. Old-growth chestnuts that had somehow survived the blight. And caves. Lots of caves that went deeper than anyone had ever bothered to map. "What did they say in their last check-in?" I asked, flipping through the file. "That's the weird part," Williams said. "According to the report, they mentioned hearing children singing old hymns. Said it was echoing from the ridgelines, but there shouldn't be anyone else back there." The 3 missing folks were experienced hikers. Military backgrounds, top-notch gear, knew what they were doing. These weren't city people who got turned around on a day hike. If they were in Troes, it was serious trouble. "I'll take a team out this morning," I told him. Williams nodded. "Radio check every hour. And Daniel, be careful out there. Something about this one feels different." I grabbed my pack and headed for the parking lot where my team was waiting. Sarah Mitchell, one of our best younger rangers, was checking her gear. She was 28, smart as a whip, and could read these mountains like a book. If I was going into rough country, she was the person I wanted watching my back. "Morning, Dan," she said. "Heard we got some folks playing hide-and-seek in Blackberry Hollow." "Looks that way. You ready for a long hike?" "Always am." We loaded into the Jeep with 2 other rangers and headed up the mountain road. The fog was starting to lift, but slowly. These October mornings could be tricky. One minute you're in bright sunshine, the next you can't see 10 feet in front of you. As we drove, I found myself thinking about those old stories my mama told. Families that came over from Scotland and Ireland in the early 1800s, settled way back in the hidden hollows where the government couldn't find them. During the Civil War, some of those families just vanished. No bodies found, no signs of violence. One day they were there, the next day it was like they'd never existed at all. "You believe any of those old stories about the Hollow folk?" Sarah asked, like she was reading my mind. "Never gave them much thought," I said. "Why?" "My grandmother used to say her great-grandmother knew some of those families, said they made a deal with the mountain spirits to protect them from the war." "What kind of deal?" Sarah shrugged. "She never said, just that some places in these mountains don't follow the same rules as everywhere else." We reached the trailhead about an hour later. The fog had cleared enough that we could see the path winding up into the trees. Blackberry Hollow was a good 6-hour hike from here, and that was if we kept a steady pace. The first few hours were normal. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the usual forest sounds. But as we got deeper into the backcountry, something started to feel off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Then I realized what it was. The quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet. Like the forest was holding its breath. We found their campsite around noon. It was set up nice and neat in a small clearing beside Blackberry Creek. 3 tents in a triangle, camp table set up with their cooking gear. Everything looked normal except for one thing. Breakfast was still on the table. half-eaten eggs getting cold, coffee still steaming in metal cups. "This is fresh," Sarah said, touching one of the cups. "Can't be more than an hour old." But that didn't make sense. These folks had been missing for 2 days. I walked around the campsite, looking for signs of where they might have gone. Their packs were still in the tents, sleeping bags laid out like they were planning to come back. "No signs of a struggle," called out Ranger Peterson from the other side of camp. "No bear scat, no torn gear. Looks like they just got up and walked away." I tried my radio. "Base, this is Clearwater. We found the campsite. No sign of the missing hikers, but their gear is all here. Breakfast still warm." Static crackled back at me, and then I heard something that made my skin crawl. Faint voices singing in the background static. Children's voices, singing an old hymn I remembered from church. "In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore." "Base, did you copy?" I tried again. More static, and then William's voice came through. "Copy, Clearwater. Did you say breakfast was still warm?" "That's right. Fresh coffee, eggs still steaming." "That's impossible. They've been gone for 48 hours. I looked at Sarah. She'd heard the singing too. I could see it in her eyes. "Maybe they came back?" she suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. We spread out to search the area. The trail led deeper into the hollow, winding between massive rhododendron bushes that grew thick as walls. About a quarter-mile from camp, I found footprints in the soft mud beside the creek. 3 sets heading upstream. But there was something wrong with them. They looked fresh, like they'd been made minutes ago. But around them were other prints, smaller ones, like children's feet. Lots of them. "Sarah, come look at this," I called. She came jogging over and knelt beside the prints. "Those are from the missing hikers," she said, pointing to the 3 adult tracks. "But these others..." The children's prints were strange. They looked old-fashioned somehow, like they'd been made by shoes that nobody wore anymore. And they were everywhere, circling the adult prints like the kids had been dancing around them. My radio crackled again. This time the singing was clearer. I could make out the words. "We shall sing on that beautiful shore the melodious songs of the blessed." "Dan," Sarah whispered. "Look." I followed her gaze upstream and felt my blood turn cold. Smoke was rising from somewhere deeper in the hollow. Not the thin gray smoke from a campfire, but thick white smoke like it was coming from a chimney. But there weren't supposed to be any buildings back here. This was wilderness area, protected land. No one had lived in these hollows for over 100 years. "Could be the missing hikers," Peterson suggested, but he didn't sound like he believed it either. We followed the creek upstream, moving slow and careful. The rhododendrons got thicker, forming tunnels we had to duck through. And the quiet got worse. No bird sounds at all now. Even the creek seemed to be running quieter than it should. After about 20 minutes, we came to a bend in the creek where the trees opened up into a small meadow. And there, plain as day, was a log cabin with smoke curling from its stone chimney. The cabin looked old, real old. Hand-hewn logs, clay chinking, shake shingle roof. But it was in perfect condition, like someone had just finished building it. Clothes hung on a line stretched between 2 trees. Long dresses and men's work shirts that looked like they belonged in a museum. "That's not on any of our maps," Sarah said. I pulled out my topographical survey. She was right. According to the map, we were standing in empty forest. But there was the cabin, solid as the mountain itself. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone home? We're park rangers." The front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a long brown dress with an apron, her hair pinned up in a bun. She looked like she'd stepped out of an old photograph. But when she saw us, instead of waving or calling back, she turned and ran back inside, slamming the door. "Ma'am," I called again, "we're looking for 3 missing hikers. We just want to talk." No answer. But I could hear voices inside, a man's voice and several children. They were talking, but I couldn't make out the words. Peterson started toward the cabin, but I grabbed his arm. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. The way the woman had looked at us, not scared exactly, More like we were something she'd been expecting but hoping wouldn't come. "Let's set up a perimeter first," I said. "Sarah, try to circle around back. Peterson, you stay with me." As Sarah disappeared into the trees, I noticed my compass was acting strange. The needle was spinning slowly, like it couldn't find magnetic north, and my watch, which had been keeping perfect time all morning, was running fast. The hands were moving so quick I could see them turn. "Dan," Peterson whispered, "look at the smoke." I looked up at the chimney smoke and felt my stomach drop. It was rising straight up, even though there was a steady breeze blowing across the meadow. The wind was moving the trees, rustling the clothes on the line, but the smoke rose straight as an arrow into the sky. That's when Sarah's scream cut through the air. I ran toward Sarah's scream, crashing through the rhododendron thickets. Peterson was right behind me, both of us calling her name. The bushes seemed to grab at us, branches catching our clothes and scratching our faces. We found her standing frozen at the edge of another small clearing. She was staring at something, her face white as paper. "Sarah, what is it?" She pointed with a shaking hand. "There are more of them." I looked where she was pointing and my breath caught in my throat. 3 more cabins arranged in a half circle around a vegetable garden. They were just like the first one, old but perfectly maintained. And there were people working in the garden. A man in wool pants and suspenders, 2 women in long dresses, and several children. All of them dressed like it was 1860. "How is this possible?" Peterson whispered. "This area's been surveyed a dozen times. There's nothing back here." I watched the people working. They moved normally, pulling weeds and picking vegetables, but something was off about them. They cast shadows, but the shadows seemed too dark, too sharp. And when one of the children laughed, the sound echoed wrong, like it was coming from farther away than it should. "Excuse me," I called out. The man in suspenders looked up at us. His face was weathered and kind, with a gray beard and gentle eyes. But when he saw us, those eyes filled with something that might have been sadness. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. His voice carried clearly across the clearing, but it had an odd quality to it, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Sir, we're park rangers. We're looking for 3 missing hikers. Have you seen them?" The man set down his hoe and walked toward us. As he got closer, I noticed more strange things about him. His clothes were clean but looked like they'd been worn for years. His boots were handmade leather polish, but showing age. Everything about him screamed 1800s, but it all looked real, not like some historical reenactment. 3 strangers came through yesterday," he said. "Or was it today? Time moves different here in the hollow." "Are they still here? Are they safe?" "Safe?" The man smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Oh yes, they're safe. Safer than they've ever been. Same as all of us." Behind him, the women and children had stopped working and were watching us. I counted 6 kids, ranging from maybe 5 to 15 years old. They all had that same odd quality. Real, but not quite right. "Sir, what's your name?" I asked. "Joseph Whitfield. Been living in this hollow since 1847. My family came over from North Carolina when the government started pushing folks off their land." 1847. That was almost 30 years before I was born. But this man looked maybe 50 years old. "Mr. Whitfield, I need to see those 3 hikers. Their families are worried about them." Joseph nodded slowly. "I understand. But you need to understand something too, Ranger. My family, we made a choice during the war. When the soldiers came through, burning and killing, we chose to stay safe. The mountain spirits, they offered us protection, a place outside of time where the war couldn't touch us." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Dan," she whispered, "the missing hikers. What if they—" I didn't want to think about what she was suggesting. But my watch was still running fast, and my compass was still spinning. And these people with their 1860s clothes and their talk of mountain spirits. "Mr. Whitfield, I need you to understand. We have to take those hikers back with us. They have families waiting." Joseph's face grew serious. "Do they? Do they really want to go back to that world out there? The world of wars and machines and people who've forgotten how to live with the land? That's not your choice to make, isn't it? Joseph spread his arms wide. Look around you, Ranger. Look at my children. Look at my wife and my sister-in-law. Do they look unhappy? Do they look afraid? I looked at the people in the garden. They were all watching us now, and I had to admit they looked peaceful. Content, even. The children were smiling. The women looked healthy and strong. But they also looked like they'd been dead for over 100 years. Where are the hikers? I asked again. Joseph pointed toward a path that led deeper into the hollow. Follow the singing. You'll find them. But Ranger Clearwater, and I know your name, I know your family. Think carefully about what you're asking. Think about what you're taking them back to. How did he know my name? I hadn't told him. As we started down the path, I heard Sarah's radio crackle. Then her voice came through, clear as day. Base, this is Mitchell. The Hollow folk are real. They're all real. And they're trying to keep the hikers here. Send backup. But Sarah was walking right beside me. She wasn't talking into her radio. Sarah, I said, did you just call for backup? She looked at me confused. No, I haven't used my radio since we found the campsite. But I'd heard her voice, clear as day. The path wound through more rhododendron thickets, and the singing got louder. Children's voices, singing hymns in perfect harmony. But the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We came to another clearing, and there they were. The 3 missing hikers sitting around a small fire with a group of children. They were laughing and talking like they'd known these kids their whole lives. Hey, I called out. Are you folks okay? One of the hikers looked up, a man named Tom Bradley, according to the file. He smiled and waved like he didn't have a care in the world. Oh, hi there. You must be the Rangers. Don't worry about us. We're fine. Better than fine, actually. Sir, your families have been worried sick. You've been missing for 2 days. Tom looked confused. 2 days? That can't be right. We just got here this morning. He looked at his watch and frowned, although my watch seems to have stopped. I looked at the other 2 hikers. They both had the same peaceful expression, the same lack of concern, like they'd been drugged or hypnotized. Listen, folks, we need to get you back to civilization. There's a storm front moving in, and this area isn't safe. One of the children, a little girl with braids, tugged on Tom's sleeve. Don't go with them, Mr. Tom. Stay and sing with us. We know all the old songs. Sir, I said firmly, I'm ordering you to come with us. This is a federal park, and you're in violation of camping regulations. That seemed to break through whatever spell they were under. Tom Bradley blinked a few times, and I saw awareness creep back into his eyes. You're right, he said slowly. We should go. Come on, guys. But as the 3 hikers stood up, the children around the fire began to cry. Not normal crying, a sound like wind through empty houses, like mourning doves at midnight. And Joseph Whitfield stepped out of the trees behind us. I'm sorry you made that choice, Ranger, he said. I truly am. That's when the world started to change. The air around us began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But this was October, and the temperature was dropping fast. I could see my breath now, even though it had been warm just minutes before. Everyone stay close, I said, but my voice sounded strange, like it was coming from far away. The clearing we were standing in started to shift. The fire pit grew larger, and suddenly there was a log cabin behind it that hadn't been there before. The children around the fire weren't children anymore. They were adults, then elderly, then children again, cycling through ages like someone was flipping through photographs. What's happening? One of the hikers, a woman named Jenny, asked. But her voice echoed strangely, and when I looked at her, she seemed to flicker like a candle flame. Joseph Whitfield walked calmly through the chaos, his form solid and unchanging. Time works differently here, he explained. Past and present, they flow together like streams meeting a river. My family, we learned to live in the spaces between moments. I grabbed for my radio, but my hands were moving too slowly. Everything felt thick, like I was trying to move through honey. "Base, this is Clearwater." "They can't hear you," Joseph said kindly. "We're not in their time anymore. We're in ours." Sarah was beside me, but she looked younger now, then older, then younger again. I watched her age and reverse age in slow cycles, and I realized with growing horror that we were trapped in the same time loop as the Hollow Folk. "The mountain spirits," Joseph continued, "they offered us a choice during the war. Watch our children die. Watch our way of life disappear forever. Or step outside of time itself. Preserve our moment, our peace, forever." "But you died," I said, my tongue feeling thick and clumsy. "All of you died over 100 years ago." "Did we?" Joseph smiled sadly. "Or did we just choose to live differently?" Around us, the clearing was filling with more people. Men and women in Civil War-era clothing, dozens of children, all of them flickering between ages like Joseph's family had been. I realized I was seeing the entire community, everyone who had made the choice to stay outside of time. "The three strangers," Joseph said. "They heard our children singing. They followed the sound, just like you did. And when they saw our peace, our happiness, they chose to join us." Tom Bradley was changing too now. His modern hiking clothes were shifting, becoming rough wool pants and a homespun shirt. His backpack dissolved into nothing, replaced by simple tools, an axe, a leather bag. "No," I said, fighting against the thickness in the air. "This isn't real. This is just mountain gas or some kind of hallucination." "Is it?" Joseph asked. "Look around you, Ranger. What do you see?" I forced myself to focus. The clearing was now a complete settlement. Dozens of cabins, smoke rising from chimneys, people working in gardens and tending, livestock, children playing games that looked like they came from another century. It was peaceful and beautiful and completely impossible. "This is our choice," Joseph said. "This is what we chose to preserve. A time when families stayed together, when people knew their neighbors, when the land was respected instead of conquered." "But it's not real," I insisted. "You can't just step outside of time." "Can't we?" Joseph gestured to the settlement around us. "You're here, aren't you? You've seen us, talked to us. If we're not real, what does that make you?" I felt myself starting to change too. My park ranger uniform was growing heavy, rough. I could smell wood smoke and fresh bread and the clean scent of laundry drying in mountain air. Part of me, a larger part than I wanted to admit, thought it sounded wonderful. No more missing persons reports. No more dealing with drunk tourists and budget cuts and politicians who didn't understand what wilderness meant. Just peace. Just family. Just home. "Dan!" Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts. She was fighting the change somehow, her ranger uniform flickering but holding steady. "Dan, remember who you are. Remember why we came here." I thought about the families waiting for Tom Bradley and his friends. Parents who didn't know if their children were alive or dead. A wife who was probably sitting by the phone, hoping for news. "The missing hikers," I said to Joseph. "Their families need them back." "Do they?" Joseph asked. "Or do their families need what they've become? Men who are always working, always stressed, always worried about money and wars and things that don't matter. Here, they can be who they were meant to be." I looked at Tom Bradley. He was almost completely transformed now, his face peaceful and young-looking. He was singing with the children, and I'd never seen anyone look so content. But I thought about his wife's voice on the phone when she'd reported him missing. The fear and love in every word. "They have a right to choose," I said. "But not like this. Not under some kind of spell." "It's not a spell," Joseph said. "It's an invitation, and they've already accepted." That's when I remembered something my Cherokee friend William Sequoia had taught me years ago. Something about thin places in the mountains, where the past and present touched, and how to protect yourself if you ever found one. I reached into my pocket for the small leather pouch I always carried. Inside was tobacco and sage that William had blessed for me. I'd never believed in it before, but right now, it was the only weapon I had. "Spirits of the mountain," I said, pulling out the sage. "I respect your power and your protection, but these people don't belong to you. They belong to the world outside." Joseph's face darkened. "Ranger, you don't understand what you're doing." I lit the sage with my lighter and began to speak the words William had taught me. Cherokee words that were supposed to create a barrier between the spirit world and the physical one. The effect was immediate. The air around us began to clear, and I could move normally again. Sarah's uniform solidified, and she grabbed her radio. Base, this is Mitchell. We need immediate extraction from Blackberry Hollow." But as the spirit's hold on us weakened, I could see the true cost of what I was doing. The Hollow folk were fading, becoming transparent. The children's laughter turned to cries of fear. "You're destroying us," Joseph said, and for the first time, he looked angry. "We've lived in peace for over a century, and you're tearing it all apart." "I'm setting people free," I said, but I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. The three hikers were changing back, their modern clothes returning, but they looked confused and frightened, like they were waking up from a beautiful dream into a nightmare. "I want to stay," Tom Bradley said suddenly. "I want to stay with the children." "You can't," I said, though it broke my heart to say it. "You have a life out there, people who love you." "Do I?" Tom asked. "Or do I just have people who need me to be something I'm not?" I didn't have an answer for that. The extraction took 6 hours. 2 helicopters and a full search team to get us out of the hollow before the storm hit. By the time we reached the outside world, the Hollow folk had faded completely, leaving only empty forest and the ruins of foundations that were barely visible under decades of leaf litter. Tom Bradley and his 2 friends were checked out at the hospital and released to their families. Officially, they'd gotten lost in the cave system and suffered mild hypothermia and dehydration. The doctors found traces of natural gases in their blood that could explain hallucinations. That was the story that went in my report. Equipment malfunction due to magnetic mineral deposits. Acoustic anomalies caused by wind patterns in the hollow. 3 experienced hikers who got turned around and spent 2 days in a limestone cave, breathing bad air. Chief Williams filed it under natural hazards and had the area marked as geologically unstable. Blackberry Hollow was closed to public access. But I know what really happened in those mountains, and I know it's still happening. Sarah transferred to Yellowstone 3 months later. She never said why, but I could see it in her eyes every time she looked toward Shadow Mountain. Some things you can't unsee, and some choices stay with you forever. I kept the job, but changed my route. Now I patrol the front country, dealing with day hikers and campers who stay on the marked trails. It's safer work, easier work. But every October, when the fog rolls in thick and the tourists go home, I hear them. Children's voices singing old hymns, echoing from the high hollows. Other rangers have reported similar things. Cabins that appear and disappear. Families in old-fashioned clothes working gardens that shouldn't exist. The Cherokee elders say the mountains are full of thin places, spots where time gets twisted, and the past bleeds through into the present. I think about Tom Bradley sometimes. He went back to his job in the city, back to his mortgage and his meetings and his daily commute. His wife told reporters he seemed different after the rescue. Quieter, always looking toward the mountains like he was listening for something. 6 months later, he disappeared again. His car was found at a trailhead near Shadow Mountain, keys still in the ignition. Search teams combed the area for weeks, but they never found him. I know where he went. And part of me envies him, because I remember what it felt like in that hollow, surrounded by family and peace and a way of life that made sense. I remember the smell of fresh bread and the sound of children laughing. I remember feeling like I was exactly where I belonged. The Hollow folk made their choice during the Civil War. They chose preservation over progress, peace over change. Maybe they were right. Maybe some things are worth stepping outside of time to protect. But I also remember the fear in their eyes when the sage smoke started to clear the air. the way they faded like morning mist when the real world came calling. Whatever deal they made with the mountain spirits, it came with a price, and that price was never being able to leave. These days, when I brief new rangers about backcountry safety, I always end with the same warning. If you're hiking in the remote hollows and you hear children singing old hymns, if you smell wood smoke but can't see a source, if your compass starts spinning and your watch runs fast, turn around and come straight back. Some places in these mountains exist outside normal time, and not all of them want to let you go. Most of them think I'm just telling ghost stories, but the smart ones, the ones who've spent real time in deep wilderness, they listen. They understand that these mountains are older than maps and surveys and government boundaries. They've seen enough to know that not everything in the world follows the rules we think we understand. And sometimes, on foggy October mornings when the mist hangs thick in the valleys, I think I can see them. Families working in hidden gardens, children playing games that were old when this country was young, people who chose to preserve their moment of peace forever. Part of me will always wonder if I made the right choice that day. If I should have left Tom Bradley and his friends in their dream of a simpler time. If I should have stepped across that threshold myself and joined the hollow folk in their eternal October afternoon. But then I think about the families waiting outside, the mothers and fathers and wives and children who love people not for what they represent or preserve, but for who they are in this moment, in this complicated, messy, beautiful world we all share. The hollow folk found their peace by stepping outside of time. But maybe real peace comes from learning to live fully inside it, with all its changes and challenges and uncertain tomorrows. Still, when the fog rolls in and I hear those distant voices singing, I have to resist the urge to follow them back into the mountains. Because I know now that some invitations, once accepted, can never be refused. And somewhere deep in Shadow Mountain, in a hollow that exists between yesterday and today, the children are still singing, still waiting, still offering their eternal peace to anyone who's willing to step outside the world and into their preserved moment of grace. The choice, as always, is yours to make. My name is Robert Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger at Blackwater Falls State Park in West Virginia for 21 years. My grandfather was a ranger, my father was a ranger, and I always figured I'd spend my whole life protecting these mountains too. I thought I knew everything about these forests, every trail, every tree, every sound the wind makes through the ancient hemlocks. I was wrong. It was September 1987, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I remember because I was leading a group of environmental students through the old growth preserve, showing them trees that were already giants when their great-great-grandparents were babies. These hemlocks had been growing for 400 years, some of them reaching nearly 200 feet tall. The forest floor was thick with moss, and the canopy was so dense that even at noon it felt like twilight. These trees are living history, I told the group as we stopped beside a massive hemlock. They've survived droughts, fires, storms, and everything else nature could throw at them. That's why we protect this area. Once trees like this are gone, they're gone forever. One of the students, a young woman with a notebook, asked, "Do you ever have problems with illegal logging up here?" I nodded. Sometimes. We're 17 miles from the main park office, and these old trees are worth a fortune. We patrol regularly, but it's a lot of ground to cover. What I didn't tell them was that we'd been having strange reports lately. 3 different logging crews had complained about equipment being moved overnight. Chainsaws left beside access roads would be found tangled in branches 20 feet off the ground. Access roads would be blocked by fallen trees, even when there hadn't been any storms. The crews blamed each other or environmental activists, but something about their stories didn't sit right with me. These were experienced loggers, and they seemed genuinely spooked. After I sent the students back down the mountain, I decided to check on some of the areas where we'd had reports. The Cherokee had always said this forest was sacred, home to tree spirits, but I'd never put much stock in old stories. I believed in science, not spirits. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Usually these woods were full of sound, birds, squirrels, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But today, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. I found the spot where the last logging crew had been working. They'd been cutting a road toward a grove of particularly large hemlocks when they suddenly stopped and left. Their supervisor told me the trees had moved to block the road, but I figured he meant natural deadfall. When I saw it, though, my blood went cold. 3 massive hemlocks had fallen directly across the planned road. But they hadn't just fallen, they were arranged. Perfectly spaced, lying parallel to each other like someone had placed them there on purpose. The problem was, each tree had to weigh several tons, and there were no stump marks, no signs they'd been cut. The root balls were intact, like they'd pulled themselves right out of the ground. I knelt down and examined the roots. The soil was disturbed, but not in the way it should be if a tree had blown over. It looked more like the tree had walked. I shook my head. That was crazy thinking. Trees don't walk. But as I stood up, I could swear I heard something. A low creaking sound, like old wood settling. And when I looked at the forest around me, every single hemlock seemed to be watching. That night, I called my friend Samuel Blackbear. He was Cherokee, an elder who knew more about these mountains than anyone. When I described what I'd seen, he was quiet for a long time. My grandfather used to tell stories. It was about the tree shepherds, he finally said. Trees so old they developed their own spirits, their own way of thinking. He said they would protect the forest when it was threatened. Come on, Samuel, I said. You know I respect your traditions, but trees don't just get up and walk around. Maybe not, he said. But maybe you should ask yourself why 3 different logging crews have run into the same impossible thing. I hung up thinking Samuel was just trying to scare me with old stories. But that night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 3 trees lying across the road like guardrails, and I heard that low creaking sound echoing through my dreams. The next morning I got a call that changed everything. Jake Thompson, one of our security rangers, found me at the ranger station with his face white as a sheet. Robert, you need to see this, he said, and bring your camera. We drove up to Sector 7, where another logging crew had been working the day before. When we got there, Jake led me to a clearing where they'd left their equipment overnight. What I saw made my knees weak. A massive Caterpillar bulldozer, 12 tons of steel and iron, was sitting in the middle of a circle of hemlocks. But it wasn't just sitting there. The trees had grown around it. Thick branches wound through the cab, the treads, even the engine compartment. Green needles sprouted from every surface, like the forest was digesting the machine. The crew left this here yesterday evening, Jake said, his voice shaky. It was fine. Everything was normal. I walked around the bulldozer, taking pictures. The branches weren't just resting on the machine. They'd grown into it. And that was impossible. Trees don't grow that fast. This would take years, not one night. Jake, I said slowly, call the state office. Tell them we need a botanist up here. And maybe a scientist who knows about trees. While Jake made his calls, I examined the branches more closely. They were definitely alive, definitely growing. The bark was smooth and healthy, the needles bright green. But how could they have grown so much in just 8 hours? I was reaching out to touch one of the branches when it moved. Not swayed by wind. There wasn't any wind. It curled away from my hand like it was avoiding me. I jerked my hand back and stared. The branch slowly returned to its original position. My radio crackled to life. Robert, this is base station. We just got a call from the logging company. Their crew found something else. What now? I asked, still staring at the branch. They're saying their foreman is missing, Joe Henley. He went to check on the equipment early this morning and never came back. A chill ran down my spine. Send backup to my location and call the sheriff's department. Already did. Search and rescue is on their way. I looked around the clearing with new eyes. Suddenly, the circle of hemlocks didn't look random. They looked purposeful, protective, like they were guarding something. Joe, I called out. Joe Henley! The forest swallowed my voice without even an echo. But in the silence that followed, I heard that creaking sound again. And this time, I could tell it was coming from the trees themselves. Jake came jogging back from the truck. The botanist is Dr. Linda Martinez from West Virginia University. She's driving up now. Should be here in 2 hours. Good, I said. In the meantime, we need to search for Joe. We spent the next hour combing the area around the clearing. We found Joe's hard hat about 50 yards into the forest, hanging from a branch that was too high for him to have reached. His lunchbox was another 100 yards beyond that, sitting neatly on a fallen log like someone had placed it there. But it was the third thing we found that made my blood freeze. Deep in the hemlock grove, where the trees grew so thick the sun couldn't reach the ground, we found Joe's work boots. They were sitting side by side, laces still tied, like he'd simply stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was what surrounded them. The boots sat in the exact center of a perfect circle of mushrooms. Not just any mushrooms, white ones that seemed to glow in the dim forest light. And growing up through the circle, covering the boots, were tiny hemlock saplings, brand new trees, no more than a few hours old. "Jake," I whispered, "how fast do trees grow?" He swallowed hard. "Hemlocks? In nature? Maybe 6 inches a year if they're lucky." These saplings were already a foot tall. I knelt down beside the circle, careful not to touch anything. The earth inside the ring was dark and rich, like the most fertile soil I'd ever seen. And it was warm. Not sun warm. The sun never reached this spot. It was warm, like something alive was breathing underneath it. That's when I heard the voice. It started as a low humming, like wind through the trees, but gradually became something that almost sounded like words. Not English, not Cherokee, but something older. Something that made the hair on my arms stand up. Jake grabbed my shoulder. "We need to leave. Now." I stood up, but as I did, I looked back at the boots one more time. The saplings had grown another inch while we'd been standing there. As we hurried back toward the truck, every tree we passed seemed to lean toward us, branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The creaking sounds followed us, and I could swear I heard footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps that shook the ground. When we finally reached the clearing, Dr. Martinez was already there, examining the bulldozer. She was a small woman with gray hair and intelligent eyes, and she looked as confused as I felt. "Ranger Ironwood," she said, "I've been studying tree biology for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. These branches show cellular growth patterns that should take decades, not hours." "Doctor," I said, "I think we're dealing with something that goes beyond normal tree biology." She looked at me sharply. What do? You mean?" Before I could answer, the ground beneath our feet started to vibrate, not like an earthquake, more rhythmic, like a giant heartbeat. The branches wrapped around the bulldozer began to tighten, and the metal started to groan and buckle. "Everyone back to the trucks," I ordered. "Now!" As we ran, I could hear the trees behind us moving, really moving. Branches creaking, roots pulling free from the earth, massive trunks shifting position. And underneath it all, that humming voice, growing louder and more insistent. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road. Dr. Martinez set up her equipment at a safe distance from the old growth preserve, but even there, her instruments were picking up readings that shouldn't exist. Tree communication through chemical signals was one thing. Scientists had been studying that for years, but what she was detecting was something else entirely. "Look at this," she said, showing me her laptop screen. "I'm reading electrical activity in the root systems. Not just simple chemical exchanges, complex patterns that look almost like neural networks." I studied the readouts. The patterns looked disturbingly like brainwaves. "How big is this network?" I asked. "That's what worries me," she said. "Based on these readings, it extends for miles. The entire old growth preserve appears to be connected through underground root systems, and the activity level is increasing." My radio buzzed with another report from Jake. "Robert, we've got a problem. The sheriff's search team found something." 20 minutes later, we were standing beside Blackwater Creek, staring at what was left of Joe Henley. I say what was left because Joe had been changed. He was alive, but barely recognizable. His skin had a greenish tint, and small branches were growing from his arms and scalp. His eyes were open, but they were the color of spring leaves, and when he looked at us, it was like looking at something that was no longer entirely human. "Joe?" I called softly. He turned his head toward me, and when he spoke, his voice rustled like wind through leaves. "The trees, they're trying to teach me. They're trying to show me how to protect the forest." Dr. Martinez knelt beside him with her medical kit, but when she tried to examine the branches growing from his arms, Joe pulled away. "Don't," he said. "I'm becoming part of something bigger, something that's been waiting for centuries to wake up." "Joe, we need to get you to a hospital," I said. He smiled, and I could see that his teeth were turning brown like bark. "The hospital can't help with this. The trees chose me because I was cutting them down. Now I understand why that was wrong." Before any of us could stop him, Joe stood up and walked toward the forest. With each step, the branches growing from his body got longer, and by the time he reached the tree line, he was barely human at all. We followed him, but he disappeared into a grove of ancient hemlocks that seemed to close around him like protective arms. When we tried to pursue, the trees blocked our path with a wall of interwoven branches. "This is getting out of hand," the sheriff said. "I'm calling in the state police and the National Guard." "Wait," I said. "Let me try something first." I called Samuel Blackbear and asked him to meet us at the forest edge. When he arrived an hour later, he took one look at the situation and nodded grimly. "The tree shepherds are fully awake now," he said. "Something has threatened them badly enough that they've decided to fight back." "How do we stop them?" Dr. Martinez asked. Samuel shook his head. "You don't stop something like this. You try to understand it. You try to find a way to coexist." That night, we made camp at the edge of the preserve and tried to figure out our next move. But the trees weren't done with us yet. Around midnight, I woke up to find our camp surrounded. Hundreds of hemlocks had moved during the night, forming a perfect circle around us. Not just moved, many of them had pulled their roots completely out of the ground and walked to new positions. The earth was torn up for miles around, and the air smelled like fresh soil and pine sap. Dr. Martinez was awake too, checking her instruments. "The electrical activity spiked about an hour ago," she whispered. "Whatever's controlling this network is getting stronger." As if in response to her words, the trees around us began to sway, even though there was no wind. The movement was synchronized, hypnotic, and it created a sound like a massive choir humming in harmony. Then the roots started coming up through the ground. At first it was just small feeder roots poking through the soil around our feet. But within minutes, thick, powerful roots were breaking through everywhere, reaching toward us like hungry fingers. One wrapped around Dr. Martinez's ankle before she could pull away. "Help!" she cried. But when I tried to pull her free, more roots erupted from the ground and grabbed my arms. The roots weren't trying to hurt us. I realized that quickly. They were trying to pull us into the earth the same way they'd taken Joe. I could feel something flowing through them, some kind of consciousness that wanted to merge with ours. Samuel appeared beside us with a small leather pouch. He scattered tobacco on the ground around us while chanting in Cherokee. The roots immediately released us and retreated back into the earth. "Tobacco is sacred to the forest spirits," he explained. "It's a sign of respect, an offering that shows we're not enemies." "But what do they want?" I asked, rubbing my arms where the roots had grabbed me. Samuel looked toward the heart of the preserve, where the oldest and largest trees stood. "They want to survive, and they've decided that the only way to do that is to make sure humans understand that this forest is alive, and it will defend itself." In the distance, I could see lights moving between the trees, not electric lights, but a soft green glow that seemed to come from the trees themselves. And I could hear voices, human voices, but changed. Joe wasn't the only one the forest had claimed. "How many people are in there?" Dr. Martinez asked. "All the loggers who've gone missing over the past month," Samuel said quietly. "The trees are turning them into guardians, part human, part forest. They're creating an army to protect themselves." As dawn broke, we could see the true scope of what was happening. The entire old-growth preserve had rearranged itself overnight. Trees that had stood in the same spots for centuries had moved into defensive formations. The forest had become a fortress, and it was getting stronger by the hour. The state police arrived at sunrise with chainsaws and bulldozers, ready to cut their way into the forest and rescue the missing loggers. I tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. "Trees don't move, Ranger," the lieutenant told me. "Whatever's going on here, we'll get to the bottom of it." I watched in horror as they approached the forest edge. The moment the first chainsaw started, every tree in the preserve shuddered like they'd all been struck by lightning. The sound that came from the forest was like a scream, not human, but definitely expressing pain and rage. The tree's response was swift and devastating. Massive hemlocks pulled themselves out of the ground and attacked the police vehicles like living battering rams. Roots erupted everywhere, flipping cars and dragging equipment into the earth. Branches reached down like enormous hands, grabbing officers and lifting them high into the canopy. "Fall back," the lieutenant shouted, but it was too late. The forest had surrounded them. I ran toward the chaos with Samuel beside me, both of us carrying pouches of tobacco. We managed to reach 3 officers who were trapped under a fallen tree and perform the tobacco ceremony. The tree immediately lifted itself off them, allowing them to escape, but the damage was done. The trees were fully enraged now, and they were advancing beyond the preserve boundaries. Ancient hemlocks that had stood in the same spots for centuries were marching down the mountainside like a living army. "They're going to destroy everything in their path," Dr. Martinez said, watching her instruments spike off the charts. "The entire network is in full defensive mode." That's when I knew what I had to do. "Samuel," I said, "teach me how to communicate with them, the Cherokee way." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "It's dangerous. If you connect with the forest network, you might not come back as yourself." "I have to try. This is my forest. These are my trees. I've been protecting them for 21 years. Maybe they'll listen to me." Samuel quickly taught me the sacred ritual his grandfather had passed down. I would need to find the oldest tree in the preserve, the patriarch that connected all the others, and make a direct spiritual connection. We managed to slip past the advancing tree army and reach the heart of the preserve. There, in a clearing I'd never seen before despite decades of hiking these woods, stood the most massive hemlock I'd ever encountered. It had to be 600 years old, with a trunk so wide that 20 people holding hands couldn't reach around it. But this tree was different from the others. It was completely mobile, walking on roots that writhed like tentacles. Its branches moved with obvious intelligence, and when it saw us approaching, it stopped and turned toward us like a giant examining insects. Joe was there too, along with a dozen other missing loggers, but they were barely human now, more like part of the tree itself, with bark for skin and branches growing from their bodies. They stood in a circle around the patriarch tree like loyal guards. "Joe," I called out, "it's me, Robert. Can you understand me?" The thing that had been Joe turned its leaf-green eyes toward me. "The forest understands," it said in a voice like wind through branches. "The forest sees that humans only know how to destroy. So the forest will teach humans a new way." The patriarch tree began to lower its massive branches toward me. I could feel its consciousness pressing against my mind, ancient, patient, but now filled with protective rage. It showed me visions of what it had witnessed over the centuries. Native Americans who honored the forest, then European settlers who cut down 1,000-year-old trees without thought, and finally modern loggers with machines that could destroy in hours what had taken decades to grow. "I understand," I said aloud, kneeling before the great tree. "You're trying to protect your home, but destroying everything won't solve the problem." I pulled out my tobacco pouch and began the ceremony Samuel had taught me. As I spoke the Cherokee words, offering respect and asking for communication rather than conquest, I felt the tree's anger slowly ease. The patriarch tree's consciousness touched mine, and suddenly I could perceive the entire forest network. Hundreds of ancient hemlocks connected through their roots, sharing memories and resources, thinking together as one vast mind. They had been dormant for centuries, but the threat of modern logging had awakened them. "We don't want to destroy," the forest voice said in my mind. "We want to survive. But humans only understand force." "Not all humans," I replied through the connection. "Some of us want to protect you. Let me show you." I opened my mind to the tree network and shared my own memories. 21 years of forest protection, of fighting to save old-growth groves from development, of teaching others to respect and value these ancient ecosystems. The patriarch considered this for a long moment. Then slowly, it began to communicate with the other trees in the network. I could feel the discussion rippling through the forest. Hundreds of ancient minds debating whether humans could truly be true. Stead. Finally, the decision was made. "We will stop our advance," the forest voice said, "but this grove remains sacred. Any human who enters with intent to harm will be dealt with as we dealt with the loggers." "And the people you've changed?" I asked, looking at Joe and the others. "They chose to become part of us rather than be destroyed. They are our guardians now. They will watch and warn us of future threats." I felt the connection slowly fade, and the patriarch tree began to move back into the deepest part of the preserve. The other transformed humans followed, but Joe paused and looked back at me. "Thank you," he said, his voice now completely inhuman but somehow peaceful. "I understand now why you love these trees so much." The aftermath was unlike anything in Park Service history. The state government quickly classified the entire old-growth preserve as a protected wilderness area with the highest possible security level. Officially, the incident was recorded as environmental protection success through advanced negotiation techniques. Dr. Martinez published papers on the forest's communication network that revolutionized the scientific understanding of tree consciousness, though she was careful never to mention the supernatural aspects of what we'd witnessed. Her research attracted scientists from around the world who wanted to study what they called the Blackwater phenomenon. The tree shepherds returned to their dormant state, but they left clear signs of their presence. The forest paths rearranged themselves into patterns that guided visitors away from the most sensitive areas. Trees that had been marked for cutting by previous surveys were mysteriously moved to locations where they couldn't be harvested. And anyone who entered the preserve with destructive intent would find themselves hopelessly lost until they gave up and left. Samuel Blackbear was hired as the official cultural liaison for the preserve, teaching visitors about Cherokee traditions and the spiritual significance of old-growth forests. He never spoke directly about the Maws, tree shepherds, but he made sure everyone understood that the forest was sacred and deserved respect. I continued working as a ranger, but my job changed completely. Instead of just protecting the trees from people, I was now protecting people from the trees. I learned to read the signs that meant the forest was becoming agitated. Unusual root growth, synchronized branch movement, that distinctive humming sound that preceded supernatural activity. And I wasn't the only one who noticed changes. Rangers at other old-growth preserves across the Appalachian chain began reporting similar phenomena. Trees moving to block development projects, equipment mysteriously malfunctioning near ancient groves, and missing persons cases that ended with people walking out of the forest fundamentally changed. It seemed the Blackwater tree shepherds had awakened something larger, a network of forest consciousness that had been sleeping across the entire mountain range. 6 months after the incident, I was leading another group of environmental students through the preserve when one of them asked about the strange stories they'd heard. "Is it true that the trees here are different?" she asked. I looked around at the ancient hemlocks standing like silent guardians, their branches swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. In the distance, I could see Joe moving between the trees like a forest spirit, no longer entirely human, but peaceful in his transformation. "These trees have been here for 400 years, I told the student. "They've seen things we can't imagine. They've survived everything nature and humans could throw at them. And if you spend enough time in an old-growth forest like this, you start to understand that there are forms of intelligence in this world that we're only beginning to recognize." The student looked around nervously. "Do you think they're watching us?" I smiled and placed my hand on the bark of a massive hemlock. Under my palm, I could feel the slow, steady pulse of something vast and ancient and very much alive. "I think," I said, "that if you're respectful, if you understand that you're a guest in their home, then you have nothing to worry about. But if you come here with chainsaws and bulldozers, if you try to destroy something that took centuries to grow, well, let's just say the forest has ways of protecting itself." As we walked deeper into the preserve, I noticed the trees leaning slightly toward us, not threateningly, but curiously, like they were listening to our conversation. The forest was alive in ways I'd never imagined before September 1987, and it was watching. And in the deepest part of the preserve, where the oldest trees stood like ancient monuments, I knew the tree shepherds were waiting, patient as they'd always been, but ready to defend their home if anyone was foolish enough to threaten it again. Some forests, I'd learned, remember everything, and some trees never forget a threat. The Cherokee had known this all along. They'd called them tree shepherds for a reason. They were the guardians of something far more precious and irreplaceable than most people could understand. And now, thanks to one terrifying September when the forest decided to fight back, I knew it too. If you ever find yourself in an old-growth forest and the trees seem to be watching you, if branches move without wind, if you hear that low humming sound echoing through the woods, show respect and move carefully. You're in the presence of something ancient and powerful, something that's been protecting these mountains long before humans arrived, and will be protecting them long after we're gone. The tree shepherds are real, and they're still out there, standing guard over the last wild places on Earth. My name is Marcus Ravenshollow, and I've been pulling people off cliffs for 16 years. When you work search and rescue in West Virginia's New River Gorge, you see every way the mountain can kill you. Loose rock, bad weather, equipment failure. I thought I knew them all. I was wrong. Hawk's Nest. Mountain rises 1,200 feet above the New River, all steep sandstone and hidden caves. The Cherokee used to call it the place of endless hunger, but nobody told me that when I took the job. They just said it was good climbing, lots of technical routes, and I'd stay busy. They were right about staying busy. I came here straight from the Army, 10th Mountain Division, specialized in high-angle rescue. 16 years later, I've done over 200 cliff rescues without losing anyone. I know every route, every anchor point, every place a climber might get stuck. I can look at a cliff face and tell you exactly how someone's going to fall off it. That November morning in 1991 started like any other. Sarah Kim, one of my best technical climbers, was checking her gear in the parking area. Jim Patterson was testing radio frequencies. Both of them had been with me for 3 years. Solid people, the kind you trust with your life on a rope. "Another missing climber report came in," Sarah said, not looking up from her rack of hardware. "Third one this month." "Where?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew. "Same place, the upper caves near Devil's Backbone route." Jim shook his head. "People get up there in panic, probably just hiked out on the other side of the ridge." But I wasn't so sure. 3 missing climbers in 4 weeks, all experienced, all last seen heading for the same area. The caves up there needed serious climbing skills to reach. Class 5 stuff, technical gear, the works. You don't just wander into them by accident. "We'll do a sweep today," I decided. "City. Heck, all the accessible caves, look for signs." The morning air was crisp, with that bite that meant winter was coming early. As we hiked up to the cliff base, I noticed something that made me pause. The usual sounds were wrong. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the wind seemed muffled. "Quiet today," Sarah observed. "Too quiet," Jim added. And he wasn't joking. We roped up at the base of Devil's Backbone, a beautiful climb that goes straight up for about 400 feet. The rock was solid sandstone, rough enough for good grip, with plenty of holds. Perfect climbing weather, good visibility, no reason for anyone to get in trouble. That's when we found the first bones. They were tucked into a small ledge about 200 feet up, the kind of spot you'd use as a rest during a long climb. Except these bones were human. A femur, some ribs, part of a skull, and they'd been gnawed. "Mountain lion?" Sarah suggested, but her voice was shaky. I examined the marks more closely. Whatever had chewed these bones had massive teeth, bigger than any cat in West Virginia. The grooves were deep, deliberate, like something had been savoring the meal. "We need to get these down to the authorities," I said, "and check those caves." The first cave was about 300 feet up, accessible only by a tricky traverse across blank rock. I'd been in it before, just a shallow depression, maybe 10 feet deep. But when we swung over on the rope that day, the smell hit us first. Decay, old death, and something else, something wild and hungry. The cave was full of bones, not just one or two pieces, but piles of them. Human bones, picked clean, arranged in neat stacks like someone was saving them for later. Some looked old, weathered by years in the cave. Others were fresh enough that bits of clothing still clung to them. "Jesus," Jim whispered. I counted at least a dozen. Skulls. Men, women, different ages, all with the same massive tooth marks we'd seen on the ledge bones. "We're calling this in," I said, "right now." But when Jim tried the radio, all we got was static mixed with something else, a low growling sound that seemed to come from inside the mountain itself. That's when we heard the call. It echoed off the cliff face from somewhere above us, a sound I'd never heard before and hoped never to hear again. Like a wolf howling, but deeper, hungrier. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, bouncing between the rock walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then silence. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." But as we rappelled down, I kept looking up at those caves. There were dozens of them scattered across the cliff face, most too high and dangerous for normal climbers to reach. How many more bone piles were up there? How many missing people had we never found? And what was making that sound? That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those neat stacks of bones, arranged like someone was keeping inventory. By morning, I'd made a decision. We were going back up there, properly equipped, with backup radios and emergency beacons. What we found changed everything I thought I knew about that mountain. The next morning, Jim looked like he hadn't slept either. "Same dreams?" he asked. I nodded. We'd both been seeing the same thing. Something tall and thin, moving across the cliff face without ropes, without gear, like gravity didn't apply to it. Just a dream, we told ourselves. Stress from finding all those bones. Sarah was more practical. I called the state police about the cave. They're sending investigators, but it'll be 2 days before they can get a climbing team together. 2 more days for whatever was up there to move those bones, or add to the collection. We go back today, I decided. Full gear, emergency protocols. But we check every cave we can reach. The weather was turning. Gray clouds hung low over the gorge, and the temperature had dropped 15 degrees overnight. Ice was starting to form in the shadows, making the rock slippery and dangerous. We started with the caves on the easier routes, the ones weekend climbers might stumble into, all empty, though several showed signs of recent use, scratches in the stone, that same wild smell lingering in the air. The higher we climbed, the stronger the smell got. There, Sarah pointed to a cave opening about 50 feet above us, hidden behind a buttress of rock. I've never seen that one before. It should have been impossible to reach without technical gear and at least 2 pitches of climbing. But when we worked our way up to it, we found something that stopped us cold. Fresh claw marks in the stone. Not from climbing gear, from actual claws, each groove 4 inches deep and sharp as razors. They went right up the vertical rock face like whatever made them could walk up walls. "That's not possible," Jim said. But the evidence was right there in front of us. Something had climbed this cliff face without ropes, without gear, using nothing but claws that could cut through solid sandstone. The cave itself was bigger than the others, stretching back into darkness. And it wasn't empty. More bones, but these were different. Arranged in patterns, almost like they meant something. Skulls in circles, long bones pointing toward the back of the cave like arrows. And in the very back, where our headlamps barely reached, something that made my blood freeze. A nest, made of human rib cages woven together with strips of clothing and rope, lined with hair and soft tissue I didn't want to identify. It was big enough for something 12 feet tall to curl up in, and it was warm. "It's not here," Sarah whispered. "How do you know it's an it?" Jim asked. "Because no person could make those claw marks, and no animal builds nests like this." That's when we heard the sound again, that deep howl echoing up from somewhere below us. But this time, it was answered. From above. We were trapped in the middle. "Ropes," I ordered. "Fast descent, straight down, no delays." But when Sarah clipped into her rappel device, the rope snapped. Not frayed, not worn through, cut. Clean as a knife blade, like something had sliced through the 11mm climbing rope like it was string. "Emergency rope," Jim said, pulling out our backup line. That one was cut too. We were stuck on a ledge 300 feet up, with no way down and something moving in the caves above us. The calls were getting closer, echoing back and forth between the cliff faces like whatever was making them was coordinating. "There," Sarah pointed across the face to another ledge system. "We can traverse over, find another descent route." It was risky climbing, especially with ice forming on the rock, but it was our only choice. That's when we saw it. Moving across the cliff face about 100 feet above us, a shape that shouldn't exist, 12 feet tall, impossibly thin, with arms that seemed too long for its body. It moved like a spider, finding holds where there weren't any, defying gravity and physics and everything I knew about climbing. And it was hunting. The thing paused, turning what might have been a head in our direction. Even at that distance, I could see its eyes, yellow, glowing, and intelligent. It wasn't just an animal following instinct. It was thinking, planning, deciding whether we were worth the effort. Then it smiled. Rows of yellowed teeth, each one sharp as a nail, in a mouth that opened too wide, and it began to climb down toward us. "Move!" I shouted. We traversed across the face as fast as we dared, jumping from hold to hold, not bothering with protection or safety protocols. Behind us, I could hear the thing following, the scrape of claws on stone, the sound of rock cracking under impossible pressure. Jim reached the next ledge first and turned to help Sarah across. That's when the thing made its move. It dropped from above like a spider on a web, landing between Sarah and the ledge, with a sound like breaking bones. Up close, it was even worse than I'd imagined. Human-shaped, but wrong in every detail. Skin like old leather stretched over bones that stuck out at impossible angles. Arms that hung down to its knees, ending in hands with too many fingers and claws like railroad spikes. And that face, mostly skull with scraps of flesh hanging off it, dominated by those yellow eyes and that grinning mouth full of teeth. But the worst part was the intelligence in those eyes. This thing wasn't just a predator, it was enjoying this. Sarah froze, pressed against the rock face, as the thing studied her like she was a particularly interesting meal. It reached out one long arm, the claws stopping just inches from her face, and made a sound, a low chuckling that echoed off the cliff walls. Then Jim did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. He threw a rock at it. The thing's head snapped around, and for a second, those yellow eyes focused on him instead. That was all the opening Sarah needed. She jumped. The creature's claws whistled through the air where she'd been a split second before, and she landed hard on the ledge next to Jim. But the thing wasn't giving up. It began to climb across the face toward us, moving with the fluid grace of something that had been hunting on these cliffs for a very long time. "Down," I shouted. "Whatever it takes, we go down." We free climbed down that cliff face like our lives depended on it, because they did. Behind us, the thing followed with casual ease, sometimes disappearing into the rock itself before emerging from a crack 10 feet away. It was playing with us. Every time we thought we'd found safety, it appeared above us, those yellow eyes watching, That terrible mouth, grinning. It could have caught us any time it wanted. Instead, it seemed to be hurting us somewhere specific. The main cave, sis. Tem, Sarah gasped as we reached a narrow ledge. It's driving us toward the feeding area. She was right. Every time we tried to climb away from the central cliff face, the creature appeared to block our path. It wanted us in the caves where it had advantages, where the bones were stacked like a dinner table. That's when I remembered something from my military training. When you're being herded, sometimes the only choice is to turn and fight. Jim, Sarah, when I give the signal, climb straight up, fast as you can. Don't look back. What about you? Jim asked. I'm going to have a conversation with our friend here. The thing had paused about 50 feet above us, clinging to the rock face like it was flat ground. This close, I could see details I wished I couldn't. The way its skin moved over bones that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves. The chunks of flesh caught between its teeth. The rope burns on its wrists where climbers had tried to tie it down in the past. You're old, I called up to it. Been here a long time, haven't you? The creature tilted its head, and I swear it looked curious. Cherokee knew about you. That's why they stayed away from this place. But we didn't listen. A sound came from its throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a laugh. How many? I asked. How many climbers have you taken over the years? The thing held up one long-fingered hand, then another, then another. It kept counting until I lost track, but the message was clear, more than I wanted to know about. Now, I whispered to Jim and Sarah. They started climbing, moving as fast and quiet as they could. The creature's eyes flicked to them, then back to me. It was trying to decide which prey to pursue. I made the decision for it by throwing my climbing hammer at its head. The tool bounced off its skull with a sound like hitting a tree trunk, but it got the thing's attention. Those yellow eyes focused on me with something that might have been respect or hunger. Hard to tell the difference. Then it came for me. The creature moved down the cliff face like what? Turf flowing downhill, impossibly fast and fluid. I had maybe 3 seconds before those claws reached me. I did the only thing I could think of. I jumped. Not down, that would have been suicide. Across to a narrow chimney crack in the rock face that I'd noticed earlier. Something too narrow for a 12-foot monster to follow. Almost. I wedged myself into the crack just as the creature's claws raked the stone where I'd been standing. It tried to follow, jamming one long arm into the chimney, but its shoulders were too wide. For the moment, I was safe. The thing pulled back and studied the crack, head tilted like it was solving a puzzle. Then it began to change. The bones shifted under its skin, compressing, rearranging themselves into new configurations. Its shoulders narrowed, its rib cage collapsed inward, and suddenly it wasn't too big for the crack anymore. Son of a bitch, I muttered, and started climbing up the chimney as fast as I could. The creature followed, its body flowing like liquid to match the shape of the crack. I could hear it behind me, the scrape of bone on stone, the wet sound of flesh reshaping itself, the click of claws finding purchase on the rock. Above me, I could see daylight. The crack opened onto the main cliff face about 100 feet up. If I could reach it before the thing caught me, maybe I could find another escape route. That's when I heard Sarah scream. Looking up, I could see her and Jim on a ledge near the top of the crack. But they weren't alone. Another creature had found them. Smaller than the one chasing me, but just as wrong. This one looked like it might have been female once, though it was hard to tell after whatever had happened to it. The Cherokee stories came back to me then, the ones old-timers told around campfires. Wendigo, cannibals who had eaten human flesh until they stopped being human themselves, ancient thin, GS, hungry things that could never be satisfied, no matter how much they consumed. And there were at least 2 of them on this mountain. The creature below me was getting closer, its reformed body sliding up the crack like a snake. The one above was circling Jim and Sarah like a cat playing with mice. I was trapped in the middle with nowhere to go but up. So, I went up. Chimney climbing is all about opposing pressure, bracing your back against one wall while your feet push against the other. I'd done it 1,000 times in training, but never with a shape-shifting cannibal breathing down my neck. The creature below me was maybe 10 feet away when I reached the top of the crack. Jim grabbed my hand and hauled me onto the ledge just as claws raked the stone where I'd been. "2 of them," Sarah said unnecessarily. "At least 2, I corrected, looking around at the dozens of caves scattered across the cliff face. "Probably more." The creatures seemed to be communicating, making sounds too low for human ears but loud enough to vibrate through the stone. They were coordinating, planning something. "The Cherokee stories," I said. "They talk about appeasing spirits, about making offerings to protect yourself from hungry ghosts." "You want to feed them?" Jim asked. "No, but maybe we can negotiate." I pulled out my emergency kit and found what I was looking for: tobacco. Every ranger in Cherokee country carries it for ceremonial purposes, though I'd never thought I'd actually need it. I scattered the tobacco on the ledge and spoke to the creatures in what little Cherokee I remembered from cultural sensitivity training. "We ask permission to leave your hunting ground. We offer respect to the old ways." The creatures paused, tilting their heads. For a moment I thought it might actually work. Then the larger one laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with wind through a graveyard. It spoke, and though the words were in no language I recognized, the meaning was clear enough. Too late, too hungry, too long since the last good meal. They came for us from 2 directions at once. The creatures moved like they'd done this dance 1,000 times before, the larger one cutting off our escape route down while the smaller one blocked the path up. They were herding us again, this time toward a cave opening I hadn't noticed before. "The main nest," Sarah whispered. "They want us in their feeding cave." I could see into the opening from our ledge. Bones everywhere, not just human ones now. Animals, birds, anything that had been unlucky enough to find itself on this mountain after dark. And in the center, more of those woven nests, some still occupied. Things that might have been human once, but weren't anymore. Pale, twisted shapes that watched us with hungry eyes. A whole family of Wendigo. "How many people have gone missing in this area over the years?" I asked. "Too many," Jim said. "But we always assumed they hiked out or fell or got lost." "They didn't get lost. They got invited to dinner." The larger creature was getting impatient. It moved closer, and I could see the intelligence in those yellow eyes more clearly now. This thing had been human once. Male, probably, given the size. Someone who'd gotten lost on this mountain decades ago and made a choice between death and something worse. He'd chosen worse. "You were a climber," I said to it. "Like us. Got stuck up here, ran out of food, had to choose." The thing nodded, and for just a moment, something almost human flickered in its eyes. Pain, regret, memory of what it used to be. Then the hunger took over again, and it reached for Sarah. I tackled it. Not the smartest move I've ever made, but sometimes you don't think, you just act. We went down hard on the ledge, rolling toward the edge. Its claws raked across my chest, cutting through my jacket and the Kevlar vest underneath like they were paper. But I'd been in combat, and I knew how to fight dirty while it was trying to get its claws positioned for a killing strike. I grabbed a handful of the loose skin around its neck and twisted hard. The thing made a sound like a wounded animal and backhanded me across the face. I saw stars and tasted blood, but I held on. If I let go, we were all dead. "The cave!" I shouted to Jim and Sarah. "Behind the nests, there's got to be another way out." They hesitated. Nobody wanted to go into that charnel house. "Go! I can't hold this thing forever." Jim grabbed Sarah's hand and they jumped across to the cave entrance, landing hard among the scattered bones. The smaller creature moved to intercept them, but Sarah had her climbing axe out and she knew how to use it. The blade caught the thing in the shoulder, black blood spraying across the cave wall. It shrieked and fell back, giving them just enough time to disappear into the darkness at the back of the cave. The larger creature and I were still wrestling on the ledge. It was stronger than anything human, but I had leverage and training. Every time it tried to bring its claws to bear, I shifted position, using its own momentum against it. But I was getting tired, and it wasn't. Finally, it managed to get one claw-tipped hand around my throat. The grip was like a steel cable, cutting off my air, lifting me off the ground. Those yellow eyes stared into mine, and I could see my death reflected in them. That's when the gunshot echoed across the cliff face. The creature dropped me and spun around, looking for the source of the sound. Below us, rappelling down from the rim, I could see figures in rescue gear. The cavalry had arrived, but guns don't kill Wendigo. They just make them angry. The creature let out that horrible howling call, and it was answered from caves all across the cliff face. Yellow eyes appeared in openings I hadn't even known existed. We weren't dealing with 2 or 3 of these things. We were dealing with a whole colony. "Marcus!" Sarah's voice echoed from deep in the cave behind me. "Back here! There's a way out!" I didn't need to be told twice. As the creature, he turned back toward me. I rolled backward off the ledge and into the cave opening, landing hard among the bones and worse things. The cave was deeper than I'd thought, stretching back into the mountain like a natural tunnel. Jim and Sarah were 50 feet ahead, their headlamps cutting through the darkness. Behind me, I could hear the creatures entering the cave, moving with the confidence of things that knew every inch of their territory. "This way leads to the other side of the mountain," Sarah called. "Old Cherokee Trail, I think." We ran through passages lined with more bones than I wanted to count, past side chambers that held things I didn't want to examine too closely. The Wendigo followed, but they seemed reluctant to go too deep into the mountain, like there were rules even they had to follow. Finally, we saw light ahead, real daylight, not the sickly glow of Wendigo eyes. The tunnel opened onto a hidden valley on the far side of Hawk's Nest Mountain, a place the Cherokee had probably used for ceremonies back when they still came to this area. We stumbled out into the afternoon sun, gasping and bleeding and grateful to be alive. Behind us, the tunnel mouth was dark and silent, but we could still hear them calling to each other, echoing through the mountain like a promise. "We know where you live. We know how you smell. We'll be waiting when you come back." Because people always come back to the mountains. Climbers, hikers, hunters, they can't stay away. And the Wendigo knew that. They'd been counting on it for a very long time. The rescue team found us 3 hours later, hypothermic and in shock, but alive. We told them about the cave system, about the bones, about the wildlife encounter that had forced us to find an alternate route down. We didn't mention the creatures. Who would believe us? The official report listed it as a successful rescue with evidence of historical cave burials, probably Cherokee, requiring archaeological investigation. The bone caves were sealed with explosive charges for safety reasons after the archaeologists finished their work. Except the archaeologists never found the real nests. The Wendigo had moved everything before the officials arrived, deeper into the mountain where human investigators couldn't follow. But I know they're still there. Sarah left the rescue service 6 months later, said she couldn't handle the mountains anymore, that they felt too hungry. She moved to Kansas, somewhere flat and safe where nothing could look down at you from above. Jim stayed, but he won't work the Hawk's Nest area anymore. Claims the equipment failures are too frequent, too dangerous. Other rangers think he's getting paranoid, but I know better. The Wendigo remember us. As for me, I still work these cliffs. Someone has to. But I've learned things the Cherokee knew centuries ago about showing respect, about making offerings, about understanding that some hungers can never be satisfied. I carry tobacco now, and I use it. Before every climb, every rescue, every time I set foot on the mountain, the Cherokee taught me the words, the old ones who still remember the proper way to ask permission from the spirits that live in the high places. Most of the time, it works. The creatures stay in their caves, content with the occasional deer or lost hiker who ignores the warning signs. But sometimes, when the moon is dark and the wind carries the smell of snow, I hear them calling to each other across the cliff faces. They're still hungry. They're always hungry. And they're still waiting. The missing person reports haven't stopped. 3 or 4 a year, always experienced climbers, always in the same area. The official explanation is equipment failure, falls into inaccessible terrain, animals scavenging the remains. I know better. Last month, I found fresh claw marks on a route I'd climbed the week before. Deep gouges in solid sandstone, too big for any native animal. The tourists think they're geological formations, natural erosion patterns. They're not. The Wendigo have learned to be more careful, more selective. They take the solo climbers now, the ones who don't tell anyone where they're going, the ones who won't be missed for days or weeks. And they're patient. They've been here longer than the Cherokee, longer than the mountains themselves. They can wait. Food comes to them eventually. It always does. If you're planning to climb in the New River Gorge, especially around Hawk's Nest Mountain, remember this. The Cherokee avoided this place for good reasons. If you find bones in impossible locations, if your equipment fails without explanation, if something large is moving on the cliff face without ropes or gear, descend immediately. Don't climb alone. Don't stay after dark. And if you hear that howling call echoing between the rock faces, run. Run fast, and don't look back. Because the mountain remembers everything that happens on it. Every climber who's ever fallen, every hiker who's ever gotten lost, every scream that's ever echoed off its walls. And somewhere in those high caves, something is always listening, always watching, always waiting for the next meal to climb up and introduce itself. The hunger never ends. It just gets better at hiding. My name is Marcus Ravenshollow, and I've spent 16 years learning that some rescues aren't worth making. Some places should stay lost. Some hungers should never be fed. But people keep coming to the mountains anyway. They always do. And the Wendigo know that. They're counting on it. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a real estate agent in Portland, Maine. I've sold over 200 houses in my 12 years doing this job. Big ones, small ones, old ones, new ones. I can walk into any house and tell you exactly what needs fixing, what's worth the asking price, and what's just pretty wallpaper hiding problems. I'm good at my job because I don't lie to clients. If a house has issues, I tell them straight up. Leaky roof? I'll point it out. Bad foundation? You'll know before you sign anything. That's why people trust me. So when the Blackwood house came on my listings in September, I should have trusted my gut and walked away. The house sat at the end of Maple Street, a big Victorian with 3 stories and a wraparound porch. It had been empty for 8 months after the previous owner, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, died in her sleep at age 92. Her nephew inherited it and wanted to sell fast. The asking price was almost half what similar houses in the neighborhood were going for. Something's wrong with it, my assistant Jenny said when she saw the listing. Houses don't sell that cheap unless they're falling apart or haunted. I laughed. There's no such thing as haunted, Jen. Probably just needs a lot of work. The nephew, Marcus Vance, met me at the house on a gray Tuesday morning. He was a thin guy in his 40s, wearing a wrinkled suit like he'd slept in it. His hands shook when he gave me the keys. I haven't been inside since we found Aunt Eleanor, he said. The lawyers handled everything. I just want to sell it and be done. Did your aunt die in the house? I asked. It's something buyers want to know. In her bedroom, 3rd floor. He looked at the house like it might bite him. Look, I'm being honest with you. This place gives me the creeps. Always has, even when I was a kid. Aunt Eleanor loved it, but I could never sleep here without nightmares. What kind of nightmares? He shrugged, looking embarrassed. Just bad dreams. I was a nervous kid. Probably nothing. Marcus handed me the keys and practically ran to his car. I watched him drive away, then turned to look at the house properly. It was actually beautiful. Dark blue paint with white trim, big windows, a garden that just needed some attention. The porch had a swing that moved slightly in the breeze. Nothing scary about it at all. I unlocked the front door. It opened smoothly, no creaking like you'd expect from an old house. The inside smelled stale, but not bad. Dust covered everything, but the furniture was still there. Victorian antiques that were probably worth a fortune. The first floor was perfect. Hardwood floors in great condition, a fireplace with beautiful tile work, a kitchen that needed updating but had good bones. I took pictures for the listing, making notes on my clipboard. The second floor had 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, all empty except for dust and cobwebs. More great hardwood, high ceilings, big closets. This house should sell in a week at twice the asking price. Then I noticed the walls. In the second bedroom, the wallpaper had a pattern of roses. Pretty, old-fashioned, a little faded. But as I stood there taking pictures, I could have sworn the roses moved, just slightly, like they were breathing. I blinked and looked again. The wallpaper was completely still. "You're tired," I told myself. "Too much coffee, not enough sleep." I finished photographing the second floor and climbed the stairs to the third floor. The steps were narrow and steep, and they creaked under my feet. At the top was a short hallway with 3 doors, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, according to the floor plan. The first bedroom was small and plain. The second was larger, with a 4-poster bed still made up with sheets and blankets. This must have been where Mrs. Vance died. I stepped inside carefully, respectful of the fact that someone had passed away here. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. A nightstand held reading, glasses, and a water glass. The closet door was slightly open. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Soft, like someone talking in the next room. I froze, listening hard. Nothing. Just the house settling, probably. Old houses make noise. I finished my pictures quickly and headed back downstairs. As I reached the second floor, I heard it again. Whispering. Definitely whispering. But I couldn't make out any words. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone here?" Silence. I checked every room on the second floor, all empty. I went back to the first floor and checked there too. Still nothing. "You're being stupid," I muttered. But my hands were shaking as I locked up the house. In my car, I sat for a minute trying to calm down. I've been in hundreds of empty houses. They always feel a little weird. This was no different. Except it was. As I started the engine, I looked up at the third-floor windows. For just a second, I thought I saw a face looking down at me. An old woman's face, pale and sad. I blinked, and the window was empty. I drove away faster than I meant to, my heart pounding. At the office, I uploaded the photos and wrote up the listing. I didn't mention the whispering or the face in the window. Jenny was right about one thing. People don't want to buy haunted houses. But as I typed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with the Blackwood house. And I was the one who was going to have to sell it. The listing went live on Thursday, and by Friday morning, I had 15 showing requests. I wasn't surprised. The house was gorgeous and the price was insane. People would ignore a lot for a deal that good. The first showing was scheduled for Saturday at 10 a.m. A young couple, David and Amy Martinez, both teachers looking for their first house. They seemed nice on the phone, excited and a little nervous about such a big purchase. I got to the Blackwood house of Target at 9:30 to open up and turn on lights. It was a cold morning, and fog hung low over the street. The house looked different in the daylight, less friendly somehow. The windows seemed darker, even with the sun trying to break through the clouds. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately, not the stale dust smell from before. This was worse, sweet and rotten, like fruit gone bad. "Probably a dead mouse in the walls," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. I walked through the first floor, opening windows to air the place out. The smell faded a little, but didn't go away completely. In the living room, I noticed something odd. The furniture had moved. Not a lot, but enough that I could tell. The couch was 3 feet to the left of where it had been on Tuesday. The coffee table was turned at an angle. Had Marcus come back? Maybe he'd been getting things ready to move out? I checked my phone. No messages from him. I was about to call when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, heavy footsteps walking across the second floor. "Hello?" I called. "Marcus, is that you?" The footsteps stopped. My heart was beating fast now. I should leave. Call the police, report a break-in. But something made me climb those stairs instead. Maybe it was pride. I'm not the kind of person who runs away scared. Maybe it was curiosity. The second floor was empty. All 4 bedroom doors were open, just like I'd left them. No one there. But the smell was stronger up here. And the wallpaper with the roses. The pattern looked different. The roses were wilted now, brown at the edges. I touched the wall and the paper felt damp. "This house needs work," I muttered, making notes on my phone. Water damage, possible mold, structural issues. I'd have to adjust the listing. The doorbell rang downstairs, making me jump. The Martinezes were here. I hurried down to greet them. David W. As tall and friendly, with glasses and a nervous smile. Amy was short and energetic, bouncing on her toes as she looked around. "This place is amazing," Amy said immediately. "The photos don't do it justice." "It needs some updating," I warned them, "but the bones are solid." I started the tour, pointing out the good features and the problems I'd noticed. They loved the hardwood floors and the fireplace. They didn't seem to smell the rot like I did. We went upstairs to the second floor. David was talking about which room would be his office when Amy suddenly stopped in the hallway. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" David said. "Like whispering. Really soft." I felt cold all over. "Old houses make weird sounds," I said quickly. "The pipes, the wind." "No, it sounded like a voice, like someone saying..." She frowned, concentrating. "I can't make out the words." David laughed. "You and your imagination. Come on, let's see the bedrooms." We toured the second floor, then climbed to the third. I didn't want to go up there again, but it was my job. The third floor felt colder than the rest of the house. Amy wrapped her arms around herself. "Is the heat broken up here?" "Might be," I said. "I'll add it to the inspection list." We looked at the small bedroom first, then moved to the larger one, Mrs. Vance's room. Amy went straight to the closet and opened it wide. "Great storage space," she said. Then she screamed. David and I rushed over. Amy was backing away from the closet, her hand over her mouth. "What is it?" David demanded. "There was someone in there, an old woman. She was just standing there, staring at me." David looked in the closet. So did I. It was empty except for a few old coats on hangers. "Amy, there's no one here," David said gently. "I saw her." Amy's voice was shaking. "She was right there. She looked so sad, and her mouth was moving like she was trying to tell me something." "Maybe it was a shadow," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. I'd seen that face too in the window. The light plays tricks in old houses, but I wasn't listening. She was backing toward the door, her eyes wide and scared. "I want to leave, right now." David tried to calm her down, but she was already heading for the stairs. He gave me an apologetic look. "Sorry. She's been stressed about the house hunting. Maybe this one's not right for us." They left quickly. I heard their car start and drive away. I stood in Mrs. Vance's bedroom, alone. The closet door was still open. I should close it and leave. Lock up, go home, never come back. Instead, I walked closer to the closet. "Mrs. Vance?" I said quietly, feeling stupid. "Are you here?" The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. The whispers started again, all around me now. Not just one voice, many voices, all talking at once. I still couldn't understand the words, but I could hear the tone. They sounded desperate, afraid. The closet door slammed shut. I ran. Down the stairs, through the second floor, down to the first floor. I grabbed my purse and keys and didn't stop running until I was in my car with the doors locked. My phone rang. Another couple wanted to see the house this afternoon. I stared at the Blackwood house through my windshield. The third floor window was dark, but I knew someone was up there, watching. I should cancel all the showings. Tell Marcus the house is unsellable. Let someone else deal with it. But I thought about my commission, about my reputation, about the bills I needed to pay. I answered the phone. "Sure," I heard myself say. "How about 2 o'clock?" I didn't go back to the office. Instead, I drove to the Portland Public Library and asked the librarian about the Blackwood house. "Oh, that place has quite a history," Mrs. Patterson said. She was an older woman who'd worked at the library forever. Eleanor Vance lived there for 60 years. Before that, it belonged to the Blackwood family, hence the name. What happened to them? Mrs. Patterson led me to the local history section and pulled out a thick book. The Blackwoods built the house in 1887. Jonathan Blackwood was a shipping merchant, quite wealthy. He lived there with his wife Caroline and their 3 children. She flipped through pages until she found what she was looking for. There was an old photograph of the family, stern-looking parents and 3 sad-faced children. In 1892, Caroline died of pneumonia. Jonathan remarried quickly to a woman named Margaret Ellis. The children didn't like her. There were rumors of abuse. What kind of abuse? The neighbors reported hearing screams, seeing bruises on the children. But nothing was ever proven. Then, in 1895, the 3 children disappeared. My stomach turned cold. Disappeared? Vanished overnight. Jonathan claimed they ran away. Margaret said they'd gone to stay with relatives, but no relatives ever came forward. The children were never found. What happened to Jonathan and Margaret? Jonathan died in 1900, heart attack. Margaret sold the house and moved away. After that, the house changed hands many times. No one stayed long. Eleanor Vance was the exception. She lived there longer than anyone. Did she ever mention anything strange about the house? Mrs. Patterson gave me a knowing look. You've heard the stories then? Yes, people say it's haunted. Eleanor used to talk about hearing children crying in the walls. She said the house was trying to tell her something. I thanked her and left quickly. At 2 o'clock, I was back at the Blackwood house for the next showing. The couple who showed up were older, retired, looking to downsize. Frank and Susan Kowalski. They were practical people, interested in square footage and heating costs. The showing went fine until we reached the 2nd floor. In the bedroom with the rose wallpaper, Susan stopped and tilted her head. "That's odd," she said. "What is?" Frank asked. "The wallpaper. Can't you see it?" We all looked at the wall. The roses were definitely dead now, brown and withered. But there was something else, and behind the roses I could see shapes, like shadows pressed up against the wall from inside. "It's just the pattern," I said weakly. "No." Susan walked closer to the wall. "There's something written here, under the wallpaper." She was right. Faint letters were visible through the old paper, words scratched into the plaster underneath. "Help us." Frank and Susan left soon after that, making excuses about the house being too large for their needs. I stood alone in the bedroom, staring at those words. My hands were shaking. I knew I should leave. This house wasn't just haunted, it was dangerous. But I needed to know the truth. I found a corner where the wallpaper was peeling and pulled. The old paper came away easily, revealing the plaster wall underneath. The whole wall was covered in writing. Dozens of messages, scratched into the plaster over and over. "Let us out, help us, Mama hurt us. We want to go home. It hurts. Please help behind the walls." My phone rang, making me scream. It was Jenny. "Sarah, are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine, just startled. What's up?" 3 more people want to see the house tomorrow. Should I schedule them?" I looked at the words on the wall, behind the walls. "Jenny, cancel all the showings. I need to do something first." I hung up before she could ask questions. Then I called Marcus Vance. "Did your aunt ever mention anything about the children?" I asked when he answered. There was a long pause. "How did you know about that?" "Tell me." He sighed. "Aunt Eleanor was obsessed with them, the Blackwood children. She said they were still in the house, trapped somehow. She tried to help them, but she never figured out how." "Did she ever say where they were trapped?" "She had this crazy idea that they were inside the walls. She said the house had absorbed them somehow. I thought she was just old and confused." I hung up and stared at the words again. Behind the walls. The sun was setting. I should leave and come back tomorrow with proper equipment. But I couldn't wait. I went down to my car and got a flashlight and a hammer from my emergency kit. I know it sounds crazy, but I had to know. Back in the bedroom, I chose a spot on the wall where the writing was deepest. I swung the hammer. The plaster cracked. Behind it was a hollow space, the wall cavity. I hit it again and again until I'd made a hole big enough to shine my flashlight through. The smell that came out was horrible. Ancient rot and something worse. I covered my nose and mouth with my sleeve and looked inside. At first I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then my brain made sense of it, and I wished it hadn't. Bones. Small bones. 3 sets huddled together in the wall cavity. The Blackwood children had never run away. They'd never disappeared. They'd been sealed inside the walls of their own home. I stumbled backward, dropping the hammer. The whispering started again, but this time I could understand the words. "Thank you," they whispered. "Thank you for finding us." The temperature dropped sharply. The lights flickered. And then I saw them. 3 children, translucent and shimmering, standing in front of me. A girl, about 12, a boy, maybe 10, and a younger girl, no more than 7. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces pale and sad. "She put us here," the oldest girl said. "Our stepmother. She said we were wicked children and God wanted us punished. She sealed us in the walls while we were sleeping. We woke up in the dark, and we couldn't get out." "How long?" I whispered. "We don't know. Time doesn't work the same when you're dead. We've been calling for help, but most people can't hear us. We tried to make them see, make them understand. But they all left." The younger girl looked at me with huge, sad eyes. "Can we leave now? Can we go see Mama? Our real Mama?" My heart broke for them. "Yes," I said. "Yes, you can go now. You're free." The 3 children smiled, and for a moment they looked peaceful. Then the oldest girl's face changed, filled with terror. "No!" she screamed. "She's coming! She knows you found us!" "Who?" But I already knew. The temperature plummeted. My breath came out in white clouds. The walls started to shake and the whispering changed. It wasn't the children anymore. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house, coming up the stairs, getting closer. "You have to run," the boy shouted. "She won't let you tell anyone. She never does." "What do you mean she never does?" "The others," the younger girl whispered. "The people who found us before. She made them stay, made them part of the house like us." The bedroom door slammed open. A woman stood in the doorway, tall, thin, dressed in a long black dress from 100 years ago. Her face was twisted with rage, her eyes empty and black. Margaret Blackwood, the stepmother. "You had no right," she said. Her voice sounded like breaking glass. "These children were mine to punish. They were wicked, disobedient. They deserved their fate." "They were children," I shouted. "You murdered them. I saved their souls." She moved closer, and the air around her seemed to shimmer and distort. "And now you'll join them. Another soul for this house. Another voice in the walls." I ran for the door, but it slammed shut. I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Margaret laughed. "The house is mine. It does what I want. You can't escape." The walls started to move, bulging inward like something was pushing from inside. The hole I'd made began to seal itself, plaster flowing like liquid. "Don't let her touch you," the oldest girl shouted. "If she touches you, you'll become part of the house." I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. Margaret was closer now. Her hand reached out, fingers like claws. "Come, child, it's not so bad being part of the house. You won't be alone. There are others here with you." That's when I saw them. Faces pressed against the wallpaper from inside. Men and women, young and old, all staring at me with empty eyes. Previous owners, probably. People who'd found the children and tried to tell someone. All of them trapped in the walls now, just like the Blackwood children. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything I could use. My eyes landed on the hammer I'd dropped. I grabbed it and swung at Margaret. The hammer passed through her like she was made of smoke. She laughed again. "You can't hurt me. I'm not flesh anymore. I'm part of this house, and the house is eternal." The 3 children were huddled together, crying. "We're sorry," the oldest girl said. "We should have warned you sooner, but we wanted so badly to be free." An idea hit me. "The bones," I said. "What if I destroy the bones?" Margaret's smile vanished. "You wouldn't dare. The bones are keeping you here, aren't they? You and the children, all tied to your remains. The children, perhaps, but I have no body. I died far from here. I'm bound to this house by will alone. But the house is bound to the children. If I free them, if I destroy their remains." Margaret screamed and lunged at me. I felt her hands, cold as ice, sharp as knives, grab my arm. Pain shot through me, and I saw my skin turning gray where she touched me. I was becoming part of the house. With my free hand, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the hole in the wall. The bones were still there, small and sad. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the children, "but I have to do this." I swung the hammer into the wall cavity. The bones shattered. The effect was immediate and violent. The house shook like an earthquake. Margaret screamed, a sound so terrible I thought my eardrums would burst. Her grip on my arm released. The 3 children began to glow brighter and brighter. "Thank you," they said together. "Thank you for setting us free." They started to fade, their forms becoming transparent. But they were smiling now, allies smiling as they disappeared into light. Margaret was screaming and clawing at the walls, trying to hold on to the house. But without the children's bones anchoring her, she was losing her grip on the physical world. "This isn't over," she shrieked. "This house is mine. It will always be mine." The walls were cracking now, plaster falling. The whole structure was coming apart. I ran for the door, and this time it opened. I stumbled into the hallway as the house groaned and shook around me. I made it down the stairs and out the front door just as windows started shattering. Behind me, I could hear Margaret's final scream of rage, cut off suddenly by silence. The house stood still, quiet for the first time. Through the broken windows, I could see that the interior walls had collapsed. The structure was still standing, but everything inside was ruins. Police cars and fire trucks arrived 20 minutes later, called by neighbors who'd heard the noise. I told them the truth, that I'd found remains in the walls, that the house had structural damage and collapsed. They found the bones. 3 children, just like I'd said. The medical examiner confirmed they'd been there for over 100 years. The Blackwood house was condemned after they found the children. The bones were buried properly in the city cemetery, with a funeral that half of Portland attended. The newspaper ran stories about the missing Blackwood children finally being found and laid to rest. Marcus Vance donated the property to the city. They tore the house down 3 months later. Now there's just an empty lot with a historical marker explaining what happened there. I quit real estate. I couldn't do it anymore, not after everything I'd seen. Now I work at a bookstore, which is quiet and safe, and nobody asks me to sell houses where children died. But I still think about them sometimes. The 3 Blackwood children, trapped in the dark for over a century. I hope they finally found peace. I hope they found their real mother, wherever souls go when they leave this world. My arm healed, but there's still a scar where Margaret touched me. It looks like frost on glass, white and delicate. Sometimes when it's cold, I can feel that same icy grip, and I remember. Jenny calls me sometimes, asking if I'll come back to real estate. The market is good, she says. Lots of houses selling. But I always say no. Because here's what I learned from the Blackwood house. Some places hold on to pain. Some places remember terrible things and can't let go. And sometimes, the dead don't want to stay dead. Last week, I drove past the empty lot where the house used to stand. It was a sunny day, warm and bright. But as I slowed down to look, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Whispering. Faint, but definitely there. Coming from the empty lot where the house used to be. I didn't stop. I drove home as fast as I could, trying not to think about what it meant. But I know the truth. I've known it since that terrible day in the house. Margaret was right about one thing. The house might be gone, but she's still there, still bound to that plot of land by rage and will, waiting for someone to build something new, waiting for new walls to hide in. The lot is for sale now. The city wants to develop it. Maybe a new house, maybe apartments. I tried to warn them. I called the planning office, sent letters, explained what I knew. But nobody wants to believe that places can be evil. They think I'm crazy, traumatized by what I saw. They're probably going to build there. And when they do, I hope whoever moves in is prepared. Because the walls will whisper again. And this time, I won't be there to listen. Sometimes at night, I still hear them. The children are at peace, I'm sure of that. But Margaret's voice reaches me in my dreams, angry and cold. "You took my house," she whispers. "But houses aren't the only walls, Sarah. Flesh and make walls too. And I'm so very patient." I don't sleep much anymore. The scar on my arm has started to spread. Just a little bit, slowly working its way up toward my shoulder. My doctor says it's nothing, just tissue damage from the original injury. But I know better. I can feel her there, on the edge of my mind, waiting, patient. The Blackwood house is gone, but some things don't need buildings to survive. And I'm starting to think that maybe the worst prison isn't made of walls and plaster. Maybe the worst prison is the one you carry inside you, forever. My name is Amanda Foxworth, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years now. I work in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, and my job is pretty simple most days. Help lost hikers, check camping permits, make sure people don't leave trash behind. But there's one part of my job that's different from most rangers. I do cave rescues. I've pulled 89 people out of caves without losing a single one. That's something I'm proud of. I know these limestone caves better than anyone. Every twist, every drop, every chamber where the air might go bad. I can navigate in total darkness just by touch and sound. My friends say I'm part bat. The Cherokee people who lived here first had a different name for the area where I work. They called Raven's Ridge the place where bones sing. I always figured that was just old superstition, mountain people scared of the dark. I'd been in hundreds of caves and never seen anything scarier than a lost college kid or some bad air. That was before September 1982, before Devil's Throat Cave, before I learned that some old stories are warnings, not superstitions. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. 4 cavers from Virginia Tech were 3 days overdue. They'd gone into Devil's Throat Cave System, which sits about 14 miles from my ranger station. It's a pretty standard cave, limestone, couple levels, some nice formations. The kind of place experienced cavers go for a weekend trip. These weren't beginners either. The group leader, Mike Santos, had been caving for 15 years. His girlfriend, Sarah Chen, was almost as experienced. The other 2, Jake Morrison and Beth Williams, were solid cavers who knew their business. They'd filed proper permits, left detailed route plans, even carried emergency beacons. But nobody had heard from them since Saturday morning. I grabbed my gear and headed out to Devil's Throat with my partner Jake. Yeah, same name as one of the missing cavers, which made things confusing later. My Jake had been doing cave rescue with me for 6 years. He was good people, steady, calm, and strong enough to haul a grown man up a 100-foot rope if he had to. The drive to Devil's Throat takes about 40 minutes on forest roads. The cave entrance sits in a little valley surrounded by thick woods. It's quiet out there, the kind of quiet that city people find creepy. Just wind in the trees and maybe a bird call now and then. But when we pulled up that Tuesday, it was too quiet. No birds at all. No squirrels chattering. Even the bugs seemed to have gone somewhere else. "You notice how quiet it is?" Jake asked, unloading our gear. I had noticed. In 12 years of coming out here, I'd never heard the forest this silent. It felt wrong, like the whole place was holding its breath. We found the missing cavers' van parked where it should be. Their gear was organized and locked up proper. These weren't careless people. Whatever happened to them had happened inside the cave. At the cave entrance, I stopped to read the rock. That's something you learn to do. Caves talk to you if you know how to listen. The air coming out should smell damp and earthy. The temperature should be cool, but not cold. There should be sounds, water dripping, air moving, maybe bats. Devil's Throat was dead silent. The air coming out tasted metallic like old pennies, and it was too cold, maybe 40 degrees instead of the 52 it should have been. Something's not right, I told Jake. Air's all wrong. We suited up anyway. When people are missing in a cave, you go in. That's the job. We had our climbing gear, emergency rope, gas monitors, and enough backup lights to illuminate a football field. Standard cave rescue protocol. The entrance to Devil's Throat is a pretty typical limb suites. A stone opening, about 6 feet wide, drops down at a steep angle for maybe 30 feet before leveling out. We'd both been in this cave before during training exercises. Should have been. Routine. But the moment we dropped below ground level, I knew we weren't dealing with routine. Our lights hit the cave floor, and I stopped so fast Jake bumped into me. Jesus, Fox, what's wrong? I couldn't answer right away. I was staring at the missing cavers' equipment. It was all there. Ropes, packs, helmets, lights. But it wasn't scattered like you'd expect from people in trouble. It was arranged. The gear sat in perfect geometric patterns. Ropes coiled in precise spirals. Helmets lined up in exact rows. Carbide lamps positioned at equal distances, forming triangles and squares across the cave floor. People don't arrange their gear like this, Jake said quietly. No, they don't. When cavers are in trouble, they drop things. They leave equipment behind. They don't stop to make art projects with their climbing rope. I knelt down and touched one of the ropes. It had been cut clean through, but not with a knife. The cut was too perfect, too smooth. It looked like someone had used a laser. Check this out, Jake called from deeper in the cave. He was standing next to the wall, shining his light on fresh scratches in the limestone. Deep scratches, carved into solid rock, forming spiral patterns that hurt to look at. I pulled out my radio to call base. Static. Just white noise. Radio should have worked fine at this depth. We keep going, I decided. But we stay together. Something happened to these people, and until we know what, we don't take any chances. The main passage of Devil's Throat runs pretty straight for about 200 feet before branching into 3 different tunnels. We'd studied the cave maps that morning. The missing cavers had planned to explore the middle passage, which led to a big chamber called the Cathedral. But as we moved deeper, everything felt wrong. Our footsteps echoed too much, like the cave was bigger than it should be. The air stayed too cold, and that metallic taste got stronger. Worst of all, the cave was completely silent except for us. No water dripping, no air moving. Even our voices sounded flat and dead. You ever been in a cave this quiet? Jake asked. Never. Caves are alive. Water moving, air flowing, rocks settling. This felt like being inside a tomb. We reached the 3-way split and stopped. According to our maps, the middle passage should have led slightly downward toward the cathedral chamber, but the middle passage was gone. Where it should have been was solid rock, like it had never existed. That's impossible, Jake said. We've been in this cave before. That passage was there. I checked my compass. The needle spun in slow circles, never settling on magnetic north. That shouldn't happen in a limestone cave. Left passage, I decided. We'll work our way around. The left tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. We had to crawl for about 50 feet before it opened up into a small chamber. Jake's light hit the far wall first. Holy shit, he whispered. Bones. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Animal bones arranged in perfect patterns across the cave floor and hanging from the ceiling on threads so thin I couldn't see what they were made of. Skulls lined up by size. Leg bones sorted by length. Ribs fanned out like flowers. But these weren't old bones. They were clean, white, fresh. Some still had traces of tissue clinging to them. What kind of animal does that? Jake asked. I couldn't answer because I was staring at something that made my stomach drop. Mixed in with the animal bones were 4 human skulls. Fresh human skulls. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Right now." That's when we heard it. A clicking sound from deeper in the cave. Like someone tapping 2 bones together. Slow, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Click, click, click. Jake grabbed my arm. That's not natural." The clicking got faster. Other sounds joined it. Scraping, like something being dragged across stone. And underneath it all, a sound that made my skin crawl. Humming. Someone or something was humming a tune I'd never heard before. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." But when we turned around, the tunnel we'd crawled through wasn't there anymore. Just solid rock wall. We were trapped in a chamber full of bones, listening to something inhuman humming in the darkness beyond our lights. "This can't be happening," Jake said, running his hands over the solid rock where the tunnel should have been. Caves don't just change. I was checking every inch of the chamber walls with my light, looking for any way out. The clicking sounds had stopped, but that humming continued. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the limestone in ways that made it impossible to tell direction. That's when I found the cave painting. Hidden behind a curtain of hanging bones, someone had painted pictures on the cave wall. But these weren't ancient Cherokee drawings. The paint was fresh, still tacky to the touch, and the images made my blood freeze. They showed a tall figure made of bones collecting people from the forest above. In the first painting, the bone figure was small, just a few bones held together. But as the paintings progressed across the wall, it grew larger, collecting more bones, becoming more complex. The final painting showed a creature 10 feet tall, made of hundreds of bones from dozens of different animals and people. At the bottom of each painting were Cherokee symbols. I couldn't read them, but I knew someone who could. Tom Crow, an elder who sometimes helped the Park Service with historical sites, had taught me a few basic symbols. These looked like warnings. "Fox," Jake called softly. "You need to see this." He was standing at the far end of the chamber, staring at something in an alcove I hadn't noticed before. When I joined him, I understood why his voice sounded so strange. It was a person, or what was left of one. The body sat upright against the cave wall, perfectly preserved but wrong in every way that mattered. All the bones had been removed from the arms and legs, leaving empty skin like deflated balloons. But the person was still alive, still breathing, still looking at us with wide, terrified eyes. "Help me," the person whispered. It was Beth Williams, one of the missing cavers. "It took my bones but left me alive. I can feel them moving around in here." She gestured weakly at the chamber full of arranged bones. "They're still connected to me somehow." I knelt beside her, trying to understand what I was seeing. Her body had no skeleton, but she was conscious and talking. It should have been impossible. "Where are the others?" I asked. "Mike and Sarah are deeper in the cave. It keeps them alive too, but takes pieces. It likes to arrange us." Her voice was getting weaker. "It's very old. It's been collecting bones for hundreds of years. It thinks bone arrangements are art." The humming got louder, closer. "It's coming back," Beth whispered. "It doesn't like visitors who aren't part of the collection." That's when the bones started moving. It began slowly. Just a few small bones, shifting position on the cave floor. But within seconds, every bone in the chamber was in motion. They slid across the stone, clicking and scraping, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The skulls rolled together, forming a circle around us. The long bones stood up on end, creating a cage. "This isn't real," Jake said. "This can't be real." But it was real. The bones were moving by themselves, and somewhere in the darkness beyond our lights, something was getting closer. The humming had turned into singing, words in a language I'd never heard, but somehow understood. It was singing about the beauty of bone arrangements, about the art of taking living things apart and putting them back together in more pleasing ways. A new tunnel opened in the chamber wall, not cracked open or broken through. It just appeared. like the rock had melted away. Something tall and pale stepped through. I've seen a lot of things in 12 years of cave rescue, but nothing prepared me for the bone gatherer. It stood maybe 10 feet tall, made entirely of bones from animals and people, not held together with anything I could see. The bones just hung in the right positions, forming a skeletal framework that moved like it was alive. Its skull was human, but too large, and its eye sockets glowed with a pale blue light that reminded me of deep cave formations. "New pieces," it said in a voice like grinding stone. "Fresh bones for the collection." It moved toward us with impossible grace, its feet not quite touching the cave floor. As it approached, the temperature dropped even further. My breath started coming out in clouds. Jake pulled out his climbing knife. "Stay back." The bone gatherer looked at the knife with what might have been amusement. Then it gestured, and Jake's knife dissolved, just turned to rust and fell apart in his hand. "Metal is temporary," the creature said, "but bones are forever. I preserve the beautiful structure that lives inside all flesh. I am an artist." It reached toward Jake with one impossibly long arm. Where its fingers touched Jake's shoulder, I could see his bones beginning to glow through his skin like an X-ray image. "No!" I shouted, grabbing Jake and pulling him away. But there was nowhere to run. We were trapped in a chamber full of bones, with a creature that could apparently remove skeletons from living people without killing them. That's when I remembered something Tom Crow had told me about the Cherokee name for this area. The place where bones sing. He'd said it wasn't just a description. It was a warning about an ancient guardian that protected the deep caves. "You're the bone keeper," I said to the creature. "The Cherokee warned about you." It paused, tilting its massive skull to look at me directly. "The old people understood. They brought offerings. They showed respect for the deep places." "What kind of offerings?" "Tobacco, sage, recognition that some places belong to older things than human memory." I didn't have tobacco or sage, but I had something else. In my rescue pack, I always carried a pouch of local herbs that Tom Crow had given me years ago. He'd said they were for emergencies in sacred places. I pulled out the pouch and held it up. "I offer respect to the keeper of the deep places. We didn't come to steal or disturb. We came to help lost people." The bone gatherer stared at the herb pouch for a long moment. The blue glow in its eye sockets flickered. "One may leave," it finally said. "One must stay. The collection requires balance." "That's not happening," I said firmly. "Both of us are leaving." The bone gatherer's laugh sounded like breaking rocks. "You do not understand. I am bound to these limestone depths by geological time. I preserve the memory of organic life in stone records. Every bone arrangement tells the story of creatures that walked above. I am a curator of deep time." As it spoke, the cave around us began to change. The walls became transparent, and I could see the true extent of the cave system. It stretched for miles underground, chamber after chamber filled with bone arrangements. Thousands of years' worth of collections, animals that had gone extinct centuries ago, people from dozens of different time periods, all preserved in perfect skeletal displays. "This is why the Cherokee avoided this place," the creature continued. "They understood that some spirits are older than human civilization. I have been gathering bones since the ice retreated from these mountains. Each arrangement preserves the memory of living things in the geological record." Jake was backing toward the chamber wall, but there was nowhere to go. The bone gatherer could change the cave structure, at will, opening and closing passages like they were made of clay instead of solid limestone. "You think in such short time spans," it said, focusing on Jake. "Decades, centuries. I think in geological epochs. From my perspective, all living things are just temporary arrangements of permanent bone structures. I simply help them achieve their final, beautiful form." It gestured, and Jake collapsed to his knees. I could see his skeleton beginning to separate from his flesh, pulling away like it wanted to join the bone arrangements around us. "Stop!" I shouted. "Take me instead. I'm the rescue leader. It's my responsibility." No, the bone gatherer said. You showed respect. You carry the old protection. But your companion did not offer respect. He threatened me with metal weapons. He must join the collection. Jake's bones were starting to glow brighter through his skin. He was still conscious, still looking at me with terrified eyes, but his skeleton was being drawn out of his body by forces I couldn't understand. That's when I noticed something. The cave paintings behind us were glowing too, reacting to the bone gatherer's power. And the Cherokee symbols at the bottom weren't just warnings, they were instructions. I pulled out my flashlight and smashed it against the cave wall. The bulb shattered, but the metal casing sparked against the limestone. Not much of a spark, but enough to ignite the herbs in Tom Crow's pouch. The herbs flared up with a bright, clean flame that made the bone gatherer hiss and step backward. "Sacred fire," I said, holding the burning pouch high. The Cherokee knew how to deal with you. But the herbs were burning fast, and I could see that fire alone wasn't going to be enough. The bone gatherer was already recovering, moving toward Jake again. I needed to think like a geologist, not just a cave rescuer. This creature was bound to the limestone formation itself. If I could damage its connection to the cave structure... I looked up at the chamber ceiling. Limestone is tough, but it has natural stress points. And I'd been studying this in cave formation for 12 years. I knew where the weak spots would be. "Jake!" I shouted. "When I say run, you run for that alcove over there, the one where we found Beth." I pulled out my emergency climbing axe and started hammering at a specific point on the cave wall where two different limestone layers met. The bone gatherer realized what I was doing and started moving toward me, but I kept hitting the same spot over and over. Crack! A small fissure appeared in the cave wall. "You cannot destroy the deep places," the bone gatherer said, but its voice sounded worried for the first time. Crack! Crack! The fissure spread, running up the wall toward the ceiling. I could hear shifting and settling sounds from above. Thousands of tons of limestone looking for a new place to rest. "Run!" I yelled. Jake stumbled toward the alcove where Beth was still propped against the wall. I grabbed them both and pulled them into the small recess just as the chamber ceiling came down. The collapse was like thunder underground. Dust and debris filled the air. The bone gatherer let out a scream that sounded like an earthquake, and all the bone arrangements in the chamber scattered as the creature lost its connection to the cave structure. When the dust settled, we were trapped in the small alcove, but the main chamber had collapsed. The bone gatherer was somewhere under tons of limestone. I could still hear it moving around under the rubble, but it sounded distant and weak. "The way out," Jake gasped. "How do we get out?" I looked around the alcove and found what I was hoping for. A crack in the back wall that was letting in fresh air. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a person, but it led upward. "Emergency exit," I said. "Every cave has at least one. We climb." It took us 4 hours to work our way up through the crack to the surface. Beth couldn't climb on her own, whatever, or the bone. Gatherer had done to remove her bones was slowly reversing, but she was still too weak to move much. Jake and I had to carry her most of the way. We emerged from the cave system, about half a mile from the main entrance, through a hole barely big enough to crawl through. The forest was still too quiet, but at least there were birds singing again. I called for emergency medical support, and they airlifted Beth to the regional hospital. The doctors couldn't explain what had happened to her bones, but over the next few weeks, her skeleton somehow regrew itself. She was walking again within a month, though she never went caving again. We found Mike Santos and Sarah Chen 3 days later, wandering the forest with no memory of what had happened underground. They were missing some ribs and finger bones, but like Beth, their skeletons slowly regenerated. None of them could explain it, and neither could the doctors. The official report listed the incident as a structural cave collapse with multiple injuries. Devil's Throat Cave System was declared geologically unstable and permanently closed to the public. The Cherokee Nation was granted protective custody of the site as a sacred area. But I knew the truth. The bone gatherer wasn't dead, just trapped and weakened. Sometimes, late at night when I'm working on reports, I can still hear that humming carried on the wind from the direction of Raven's Ridge. And other cave rescue teams throughout the Appalachian Mountains have started reporting similar incidents. Bones arranged in impossible patterns. Cavers found alive but missing parts of their skeletons. Caves that change their internal structure overnight. Tom Crow wasn't surprised when I told him what really happened. There are many keepers in the deep places, he said. Bone gatherers, stone singers, water guardians. They've been here since the mountains were young. The old people knew to leave offerings and show respect. But most people today have forgotten how to listen to the warnings. I haven't forgotten. Every month I hike out to the sealed entrance of Devil's Throat and leave tobacco and sage at the cave mouth. Not because I worship the thing down there, but because some forms of respect are just practical safety measures. I still do cave rescues, 89 successful missions without losing anyone. But now I pay attention to different signs. If I find bones arranged in patterns, if equipment starts failing in sequence, if caves are too quiet or too cold, we leave immediately. No discussion, no debate. Because I learned something important in Devil's Throat Cave. There are things in these mountains older than human memory, older than human civilization. They don't think like us, don't value what we value. They operate on geological timescales that make our entire species look like a brief flicker. Most of them are content to be left alone in the deep places. But if you disturb them, if you take their territory for granted, if you forget that humans are newcomers to these ancient mountains, well, they might decide to add you to their collection. So if you're ever caving in Appalachian limestone country, and you hear clicking sounds from the darkness, and your equipment starts failing for no reason, get out immediately. Don't try to investigate. Don't assume there's a rational explanation. Some things in these mountains are older than rational explanations. Trust me on this one. My name is Amanda Foxworth, and I've seen what lives in the deep places where bones sing. My name is Elizabeth Moonfeather, and I've been watching the weather on Grandfather Mountain for 18 years. People think being a park ranger is all about helping lost hikers and giving nature talks. But up here in the high country of North Carolina, my real job is reading the sky. I grew up hearing my Cherokee grandmother's stories about cloud spirits that danced in the mountain mist. Back then, I thought they were just pretty tales to explain things people didn't understand. I went to college, got my degree in weather science, and learned to trust instruments instead of old stories. That was before December 1993, when I learned that some weather has a mind of its own. The weather station sits at 5,200 feet, 31 miles from the main park office. It's just me, my instruments, and whatever the mountain decides to throw at me. I've seen ice storms that turn trees into glass sculptures. I've watched fog so thick you can't see your own feet. I felt wind that could knock a grown person right off a cliff, but I always understood it. Weather follows rules. Hot air rises, cold air sinks, water vapor condenses at certain temperatures. Pressure systems move in patterns you can predict if you know what to look for. At least, that's what I used to think. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when my barometer went crazy. The needle jumped around like a fish on a hook, showing pressure changes that made no sense. Outside, the fog was thick as cotton, but my wind gauge said there should be a 15-mile-per-hour breeze clearing it out. I checked all my equipment twice. Everything looked fine, but the readings were impossible. Then David Ross, my weather tech, called on the radio. His voice was shaky. "Elizabeth, you need to come down to Checkpoint 7. There's something you have to see." Checkpoint 7 was where we monitored cloud formation on the eastern slope. And I grabbed my emergency pack and hiked the 2 miles down through fog so thick I had to follow the trail markers with my hands. David was standing next to his weather station, staring into the mist. His face was white as paper. "What's wrong?" I asked. He pointed into the fog. "There's someone in there. I saw them 3 times now, but when I call out, they don't answer. They just move away." I squinted into the gray wall of mist. Probably just hikers who got turned around. "No," David said, shaking his head. "These people aren't walking on the ground. They're floating about 6 feet up, and they're made of fog." I was about to tell him he needed to get his eyes checked when my radio crackled. Not with a voice, but with something that sounded almost like whispering. The words were faint, but they sounded like Cherokee. The hair on my arms stood up. My grandmother used to whisper prayers in Cherokee, just like that. "Pack up your gear," I told David. "We're heading back to the main station." As we gathered the equipment, the fog around us started to move in ways that made my stomach turn. It swirled in circles, forming shapes that looked almost like people before dissolving again. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds, and my breath came out in white puffs. That's when I saw them. 3 figures standing in the mist about 20 yards away. They were tall and thin, made of fog and cloud, but shaped like people. I could see right through them, but they had faces. Old faces with deep eyes that seemed to look right into my soul. One of them raised a hand that was nothing but swirling mist, and I felt the wind change direction. The fog parted just enough to create a path back to the main trail. "Did you see that?" David whispered. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We followed the path the mist person had made for us, walking fast but not running. I could feel them watching us the whole way back. When we reached the weather station, I looked over my shoulder and saw them standing at the edge of the tree line. They were still there when I locked the door. That night, I called my great-aunt Mary Feather, who still lived on the reservation. She was one of the few people left who remembered the old stories. "Aunt Mary," I said, "tell me about the cloud spirits." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Why are you asking, Elizabeth?" I told her what we'd seen. When I finished, she sighed. "The mist walkers," she said. "They guard the high places where the sky touches the mountain. Your grandmother could speak with them. She said they helped our people predict the weather for hundreds of years." "But that's just what? Just stories?" Her voice was sharp. "Child, some stories are true whether you believe them or not. You work up there in their territory every day. Have you been respectful?" I thought about all the times I'd cursed the fog for making my job harder. All the times I'd complained about the unpredictable mountain weather. "I don't know," I admitted. "Then you better learn," Aunt Mary said. "Because if the mistwalkers are showing themselves to you, it means something big is coming." The big something turned out to be Dr. James Clearwater, a meteorologist from the State University. He arrived the next morning with a truck full of fancy equipment and a graduate student named Sarah, who looked like she'd never been outside a laboratory. "We're here to study the unusual atmospheric conditions you've been reporting," Dr. Clearwater said. He was a thin man with glasses and the kind of confidence that comes from never being wrong about anything. I wanted to tell him that some things couldn't be studied with instruments, but I kept my mouth shut. Instead, I helped them set up their thermal imaging cameras and atmospheric sensors around the mountain. For 3 days, everything was normal. The weather behaved like weather should. Dr. Clearwater started looking disappointed, like maybe he'd was towels. "Ted is time coming up here." Then the fog rolled in. It started at dawn on Friday, creeping up from the valleys like gray fingers reaching for the sky. But this fog was different. It moved too fast and in the wrong direction. My instruments said the wind was blowing north, but the fog was flowing south. "That's impossible," Dr. Clearwater said, staring at his readouts. I was watching the fog through binoculars when I saw them. The mistwalkers were moving through the clouds like swimmers through water. There were more of them now, maybe a dozen, and they seemed to be guiding the fog toward our weather station. "Dr. Clearwater," I said, "we need to get everyone inside, right now. Don't be ridiculous. It's just unusual weather. My equipment will record everything." That's when Sarah screamed. She was standing next to one of the thermal cameras, pointing at the little screen. "Professor, look at this." The thermal image showed the fog, but there were bright spots moving through it. Human-shaped spots that glowed with body heat, even though they were made of mist. "Equipment malfunction," Dr. Clearwater muttered, but his voice wasn't confident anymore. The fog reached us then, thick and cold and full of whispers. I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the weather station building. "Come on!" Dr. Clearwater stayed outside, frantically checking his instruments. "This is incredible! The atmospheric pressure is fluctuating in patterns that suggest organized intelligence. That's when the fog closed around him like a fist. 1 second he was there, talking excitedly into his recording device. The next second, the mist swallowed him completely. I could hear his voice, but it sounded like it was coming from far away, even though he was only 10 feet from the door. "Dr. Clearwater!" I shouted into the fog. His voice came back, but it was strange, echoing. "Elizabeth, I can see. Them. They're beautiful. They're trying to tell me something about the storms." Then silence. Sarah was crying. David was white as a sheet. And I was standing there with my radio in my hand, knowing I had to call for help, but not knowing how to explain what had just happened. The fog stayed for 6 hours. My instruments went crazy the whole time, recording temperature swings and pressure changes that made no scientific sense. The wind gauge spun like a pinwheel. The barometer looked like it was having a seizure. And through it all, I could hear Dr. Clearwater's voice in the distance, sometimes excited, sometimes frightened, always just far enough away that I couldn't reach him. When the fog finally lifted, he was gone. His equipment was still there, still running, but there was no sign of him anywhere. It was like he'd been erased from the world. "We have to call search and rescue," Sarah said. I nodded, but I was thinking about what Aunt Mary had told me. The Mistwalkers didn't just guard the high places. They preserved things, important things, and maybe, sometimes, important people. The search teams came with helicopters and dogs and all the modern gear you could want. They searched for 3 days and found nothing. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, not even a disturbance in the leaf litter. It was like Dr. Clearwater had simply become part of the mountain. On the third night, after the searchers had given up and gone home, I sat outside the weather station and looked up at the fog that was starting to form around the peaks. The moon was full, turning the mist silver and beautiful. "I know you have him," I said to the fog. "And I know he probably asked for it, poking around where he didn't belong. But he's got a wife and kids back home. They need him back." The fog swirled, and for a moment I thought I saw a face in it, an old face with kind eyes. Then my radio crackled, and I heard Dr. Clearwater's voice, faint but clear. "Elizabeth, tell them I'm learning. Tell them the storm will be terrible, but the Mistwalkers, they're trying to help." The voice faded, and the fog moved down the mountain like water flowing downhill. That's when I knew I had to find another way. I drove down to the reservation the next morning to see Aunt Mary. She lived in a small house surrounded by herb gardens where she still made traditional medicines and kept the old ceremonies alive. "The spirits have your friend," she said before I could even explain why I'd come. "Can we get him back?" She studied my face for a long time. "Depends. Are you willing to do things the old way? The way your grandmother would have done?" "I'll do whatever it takes." Aunt Mary nodded and went into her house. She came back with a leather pouch full of herbs and a necklace made of feathers and small bones. "Tonight is the new moon," she said. "The Mistwalkers will be strongest then. You'll need to go to the sacred place, the flat rock where your grandmother used to pray. Burn these herbs and wear this necklace. Then ask them properly." "Ask them what?" "For partnership. That's how it used to work. We helped them understand the world below the clouds, and they helped us understand the world above. Your friend got caught because he was taking without asking. The spirits don't like that." I took the pouch and necklace. The feathers were soft and warm, like they'd just come from a living bird. "What if they say no?" Aunt Mary's eyes were sad. "Then you better hope they like you enough to let you go home." That evening, I hiked up to the sacred place. It was a flat outcrop of granite about a mile above the weather station, where you could see across 3 states on a clear day. My grandmother had brought me here when I was little, before she died. I remembered her burning sweet grass and singing in Cherokee while the wind carried the smoke up to the clouds. The fog was already forming when I got there, thick and silver in the moonless dark. I lit the herbs the way Aunt Mary had shown me and put on the feather necklace. The smoke rose straight up, even though there was a breeze that should have scattered it. Then I sat, cross-legged on the rock, and waited. They came with the fog, rising out of the mist like ghosts becoming real. There were dozens of them now, tall figures made of cloud and starlight. They surrounded the rock in a circle, and I felt their attention like a weight on my shoulders. The one in front of me was different from the others. Older, somehow. More solid. When it spoke, I didn't hear words. I felt them, like thoughts appearing in my mind. "Why do you come here, daughter of the wind speaker?" "My grandmother," I said out loud. "You knew her." She sang to us for many seasons. She listened when we warned of the great storms. We miss her voice. "There's a man, Dr. Clearwater. Your people took him. The one who seeks to capture our secrets in his metal boxes. He is safe. He learns our language. But he needs to go home. His family needs him." The Mistwalker was quiet for a long time. Around us, the others whispered to each other in voices like wind through pine trees. "He cannot leave unchanged. He has seen too much, learned too much. But you could take his place." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother promised that her line would return to serve as bridge between our worlds. You have her gift. You can speak to sky and earth both." I thought about Dr. Clearwater's wife and kids. I thought about David and Sarah and all the people who counted on the weather station to keep them safe. I thought about my grandmother, who had somehow made peace between two worlds that barely understood each other. What would I have to do? Learn our ways. Become our voice in the world below. Help us protect the high places from those who would harm them. And in return, we will teach you to read the true weather, the storms that come from the heart of the sky, not just the spinning of the earth. You will know 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 seasons ahead what the mountain will send. It was a hell of an offer. Weather prediction like that could save lives, protect property, change everything about how people lived in the mountains. But it would also mean leaving behind everything I thought I knew about how the world worked. I looked up at the Mistwalker, its ancient face patient and kind. "I need to see him first," I said. "Dr. Clearwater. I need to know he's really okay." The figure nodded and stepped aside. The fog swirled, and suddenly I could see into it like looking through clear water. Dr. Clearwater was there, standing on what looked like a cloud but felt solid under his feet. He looked amazed rather than frightened, like a kid seeing snow for the first time. Around him, Mistwalkers moved like dancers, showing him patterns in the air that made him gasp with wonder. He saw me and waved. "Elizabeth, this is incredible. They're showing me how weather really works. Not just the physics we know, but the consciousness behind it. The patterns that guide the patterns." "Are you okay?" I called. "Better than okay. But I understand now why I can't just go back. How could I ever explain this? How could I live in a world where I pretend weather is just random when I know it's alive?" I felt the Mistwalker's attention return to me. "You see, he has chosen, but the choice remains yours." I closed my eyes and thought about my grandmother, singing to the clouds in a language older than science. I thought about all the storms I'd failed to predict, all the people who might have been safer if I'd known what the mountain was really planning. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I had to do. "I accept," I said. The moment the words left my mouth, the world changed. The fog around me came alive, flowing like water but warm as breath. It wrapped around me gently, and suddenly I could feel the entire mountain, every tree, every rock, every drop of moisture in the air. It was like becoming part of something vast and ancient and patient. The Mistwalker reached out with a hand made of cloud and touched my forehead. Knowledge flooded into me. Not facts, but understanding. I could feel the great river of air that flowed around the earth, the way pressure and temperature danced together to create weather. I could sense storms forming hundreds of miles away, feel the mountain's moods as clearly as my own heartbeat. But more than that, I could feel the Mistwalkers themselves. They weren't separate beings. They were parts of a vast consciousness that lived in the high places, old as the mountains themselves. They watched over the weather like shepherds tending a flock, guiding storms away from harm bringing rain when it was needed, warning of danger through those willing to listen. "Now you understand," the Mistwalker said. "We are the memory of the sky, the keepers of the patterns. Your people forgot how to listen, but the need remains." Images flashed through my mind. Great hurricanes turned aside from populated coasts, tornadoes guided away from schools and hospitals, gentle rains brought to drought-stricken farms. The Mistwalkers had been working quietly for centuries, protecting the world below through their partnership with people like my grandmother. But the partnership had been broken. Modern people trusted only instruments and ignored the older ways of reading the sky. The Mistwalkers had grown lonely and desperate, and when Dr. Clearwater had come with his machines and his scientific arrogance, they'd taken the only chance they'd had in decades to share their knowledge. "He will return to his world," the Mistwalker promised. But changed. "He will remember enough to help his people prepare for what comes. You will remain as bridge between worlds." "What's coming?" I asked. The fog around me darkened, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. In my mind, I saw storms unlike anything in recorded history. Massive hurricanes that made Katrina look like a summer shower. Tornadoes that carved paths hundreds of miles long. Ice storms that could shut down entire states. "The earth grows warm," the Mistwalker explained. "The patterns we have guided for 10,000 years are breaking. New patterns form, wild and angry. We need voices in your world to help prepare." I understood then why this was happening now, why the Mistwalkers had revealed themselves after staying hidden for so long. Climate change wasn't just about melting ice caps and rising seas. It was breaking the ancient contracts between earth and sky, creating weather systems that even the Mistwalkers struggled to control. What do I need to do? Learn, teach, bridge the gap between old wisdom and new knowledge. Help your people remember that weather is not their enemy to be conquered, but their partner to be respected. The fog began to thin, and I could see Dr. Clearwater walking toward us across the solid cloud. He looked different, older somehow, like he'd aged months in the few days he'd been gone, but his eyes were bright with wonder. "Elizabeth," he said, "they've shown me things that will change everything we know about meteorology. But they're right. I can't just publish papers about this. Who would believe it? Instead, I'm going to work on practical applications, better warning systems, more accurate long-range forecasting. I'll find ways to use what they've taught me without having to explain where the knowledge came from." I nodded. That was the bridge we needed, ancient wisdom expressed through modern science. The Mistwalker who had spoken to me stepped forward and placed cloud hands on both our shoulders. "Go now. The learning begins." The fog swirled around us, and suddenly we were standing on the granite outcrop again. The herb smoke had burned out, and the sky was beginning to lighten with dawn. Dr. Clearwater looked around in confusion. "How did we—" "Don't ask questions you don't want answered," I said. "Let's get you back to your equipment." As we walked down the mountain, I could feel the Mistwalkers watching us from the thinning fog. My weather sense was sharper now. I could feel a storm system forming over the Gulf of Mexico that wouldn't reach us for 6 days, could sense the exact minute the morning fog would clear. But more than that, I could feel the responsibility settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. I was the bridge now between two worlds that needed each other more than they knew. That was 30 years ago. Dr. Clearwater went back to the university and revolutionized meteorology, developing prediction models that were so accurate they seemed almost magical. He never talked about where his insights came from, but his work has saved thousands of lives over the decades. I stayed on the mountain, officially as head of the High Country Weather Service, unofficially as the voice between worlds. I learned to read the old signs alongside the new instruments. I learned to sing the weather songs my grandmother had taught me and to burn the right herbs when the storms needed guidance. The climate has changed, just as the Mistwalkers warned. The hurricanes are stronger, the tornadoes more violent, the droughts longer, and the floods worse. But because we have the partnership again, we're ready for them. My forecasts are accurate enough that people have time to prepare, to evacuate, to protect what matters most. Other meteorologists think I'm just incredibly good at reading atmospheric data. They don't know I'm also reading the moods of ancient spirits who remember when the Great Lakes were glaciers and the deserts were forests. The mistwalkers still come to me when the moon is dark and the fog is thick. They tell me about the great patterns shifting, about storms forming in places where storms were never born before. Sometimes they bring news from other mountains, other weather spirits who are waking up after centuries of sleep. The earth is changing, and the sky is changing with shit. But now we have voices to help us understand what's coming, and hands to help us prepare. Sarah, Dr. Clearwater's old graduate student, works with me now. She's learned to listen to more than just instruments, though she doesn't know why her intuition about weather is so good. David Ross retired, but he still calls sometimes to tell me about strange clouds he's seen and ask if they mean anything important. And on nights when the fog rolls thick around Grandfather Mountain, I climb up to the sacred rock and listen to the voices in the mist. They tell me stories about the old days and warnings about the new ones. They remind me that weather isn't just physics and chemistry. It's a living system that can be partner or enemy, depending on how we choose to treat it. If you're ever up in the high country and you see fog moving against the wind, if you hear whispers in languages older than English, if the weather feels like it's watching you, don't be afraid. Just be respectful. The mistwalkers are still there, still guarding the high places, still willing to help those who know how to ask properly. But they're not the only weather spirits waking up. The storms are getting stranger, and the old partnerships are forming again all across the world. Because the earth is changing, and we're going to need all the help we can get. The mistwalkers taught me that weather isn't something that happens to us. It's something we're part of. And the sooner we remember how to be good partners with the sky, the better our chances of surviving what's coming. So next time a storm approaches your town and the warnings are eerily accurate, remember that somewhere on a mountaintop, someone is listening to voices in the mist, and those voices are trying their best to keep you safe. My name is Jennifer Nighthawk, and I've been a forest ranger for 19 years. I spend most of my nights in the woods with infrared cameras and thermal scopes, tracking bears and deer through the cranberry wilderness in West Virginia. It's lonely work, but I love it. The mountains at night are peaceful, predictable. Every sound has a source. Every shadow has something casting it. At least that's what I thought until October 1984. The cranberry wilderness sits high up in the mountains, over 4,000 feet above sea level. It's a strange place, all bogs and stunted spruce trees, with thick fog that never seems to lift. The Cherokee used to tell stories about shadow spirits that hunted in these woods, but I'm a scientist. I have a PhD in zoology. I don't believe in ghost stories. I was tracking a family of black bears that had been acting weird. They'd abandoned their usual feeding spots and moved to higher ground like they were running from something. My cameras kept picking up thermal signatures, heat patterns that looked like people walking through the bog at night. But when I checked the next morning, there were never any footprints. My research station is a small cabin 26 miles from the nearest road. It's just me and my equipment most of the time, though sometimes my assistant Mark Rivera comes up to help with the night surveys. Mark's a good kid, fresh out of college, eager to learn about wildlife research. Dr. Nighthawk, Mark said one evening in early October, looking at the computer screen where we reviewed the night's camera footage. Look at this. The thermal image showed a clear human shape walking across the bog. The heat signature was perfect. Head, arms, legs, everything you'd expect from a person. But the movement was wrong. It glided across the soft bog without sinking, without disturbing the moss or water. Equipment malfunction, I said, though something cold settled in my stomach. Humidity messes with the cameras sometimes. But 3 different cameras had recorded the same thing, and this was the 5th night in a row. That's when the temperature started dropping. Not gradually, like normal October weather. Suddenly, in patches. I'd be walking through the bog and hit a wall of cold air that felt like stepping into a freezer. The electronic equipment began acting up too. My radio would fill with static that almost sounded like whispers. My GPS readings would jump around like I was moving at impossible speeds. The Cherokee had a name for this place. They called it the hunting ground of the shadow walkers. I'd always assumed it was just a story to keep people away from dangerous bog country. But now, standing in my research station with footage of things that shouldn't exist, I wasn't so sure. The worst part was the silence. In 19 years of night research, I'd never heard the woods go completely quiet. There are always sounds: owls, insects, small animals moving through brush. But on the nights when we recorded those thermal signatures, everything went dead silent. Even the wind stopped. Mark started having nightmares. He'd wake up talking about walking through the bog in darkness, following shapes that stayed just ahead of him. "They're hunting," he'd say, his eyes wide and scared. "They're always hunting." I should have pulled him out then. Should have packed up the research station and called it a season. But I'm stubborn, and I wanted answers. Scientists don't run from things they can't explain. We study them. That was my first mistake. 3 weeks into October, Mark volunteered for a solo night survey. He wanted to prove he could handle the equipment alone, track the thermal anomalies himself. I should have said no. The bog at night wasn't safe for anyone working alone, even without two. Strange readings we'd been getting. But Mark was insistent, and the rational part of my brain kept saying there had to be a logical explanation. Swamp gas, unusual atmospheric conditions, some kind of natural phenomenon we hadn't identified yet. I gave him the emergency beacon and watched him head into the bog around sunset. The fog was thicker than usual, rolling in like gray soup. Within an hour, I'd lost visual contact even with binoculars. His radio check-ins came every hour, right on schedule. "All quiet out here, Dr. Nighthawk. No movement on thermal." His voice sounded steady, professional. Then, at 11:47 p.m., his emergency beacon activated. I grabbed my gear and ran into the bog, following the beacon's signal. The temperature dropped with every step. By the time I was halfway to Mark's position, I could see my breath. The thermal scope showed my own body heat, but nothing else. No deer, no bears, no birds. The entire ecosystem had gone silent and invisible. I found Mark standing in a clearing, perfectly still, staring into the fog. His thermal camera was on the ground next to him, the display cracked. When I called his name, he didn't respond. When I shook his shoulder, he felt like ice. He was hypothermic, in October, in West Virginia, with no logical explanation. I got him back to the station and called for medical evacuation. The paramedics said his core body temperature had dropped to 89 degrees. Dangerous hypothermia that should have been impossible given the mild weather. When Mark finally came around 3 days later, he couldn't remember anything after 10 p.m. "I was following the heat signatures," he said, his voice distant and confused. "They kept moving deeper into the bog. I could see them on thermal, but when I looked with my eyes, there was nothing there." That's when Dr. Susan Torres arrived. Susan was a wildlife biologist from the university, sent to help investigate what the rangers were calling environmental anomalies. She brought more sophisticated equipment, military-grade thermal imaging, electromagnetic field detectors, seismic sensors. "There's definitely something happening here," Susan said after her first night review. "Look at this." The new thermal cameras had captured perfect footage, 7 human-shaped figures moving in formation across the bog. They appeared on thermal as clear body heat, but the night vision cameras showed nothing. The electromagnetic sensors went crazy when the figures passed by, registering massive field disturbances. "It's like they're there and not there at the same time," Susan murmured, studying the data. But the strangest thing was the seismic readings. The figures were registering weight displacement in the bog, footsteps heavy enough to trigger the sensors. But when we checked the next morning, there were no tracks. The moss wasn't even disturbed. That night, Susan decided to try something different. She set up a grid of motion sensors around a small section of bog, creating a detection net. If something was moving through there, we'd know exactly where and when. Around 2 a.m., the sensors started triggering in sequence. Something was moving through the grid in a straight line, setting off each sensor precisely as it passed. But the thermal cameras showed empty bog. The night vision showed empty bog. Whatever was triggering the sensors was completely invisible. "This is impossible," Susan whispered, watching the sensor grid light up like a Christmas tree. Then the temperature dropped, not gradually, instantly, 20 degrees in 5 seconds. Our breath came out in white puffs. Ice started forming on the camera equipment, and in the sudden cold, we finally saw them. They weren't solid exactly, more like shadows that moved independently of anything casting them. Human-shaped darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 7 figures, just like the thermal images, moving in perfect coordination through the bog. They were hunting. The shadow walkers moved like a pack of wolves, but with intelligence that made my skin crawl. They communicated without sound, coordinating their movements with precision that spoke of ancient practice, and they were aware of us watching. Susan and I huddled in the research station, reviewing the footage from that night. The shadows had approached our sensor grid deliberately, testing our equipment like they were learning about us. When the thermal cameras focused on them, they seemed to turn and look directly at the lenses. "They're not just hunting animals," Susan said, her voice tight with fear. "They're studying us." Mark's condition got worse. Even inside the heated station, his body temperature kept dropping. He'd sit by the fire, wrapped in blankets, and still shiver. When he slept, he talked in his sleep, words in a language none of us recognized, with clicking sounds that hurt to hear. Dr. Torres brought in a Cherokee elder, Mary Crow, who lived near the National Forest. The moment Mary saw Mark, her face went grave. "Shadow walkers," she said simply. "Your friend has been touched by them. They fed on his warmth, his life force. If they come back for him, he won't survive it." Mary explained what the Cherokee had always known about this place. The bog was a feeding ground for ancient spirits that hunted in darkness. They drained the life from anything warm-blooded, leaving behind frozen corpses that would never decay in the acidic bog water. "My grandfather's grandfather helped build the spirit barriers," Mary said. "Sacred stones placed around the bog to keep the shadow walkers contained. But the stones have been moved over the years by loggers and hikers. The barriers are broken." That explained why the bears had fled to higher ground. They could sense what was coming. On the 4th night after Mark's encounter, I was alone in the station when the power went out. Not just our generator. Every electronic device died simultaneously. My watch stopped. The battery-powered radio went silent. Even my flashlight wouldn't turn on. In the sudden darkness, yes, I heard them. Footsteps in the bog. Wet, sucking sounds as something heavy moved through the moss. But underneath that, a sound like wind through dry leaves. Whispers in that same clicking language Mark had been speaking in his sleep. I felt the cold creeping under the door. Ice formed on the windows from the inside. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see. They were testing the barriers around the station, looking for a way in. I grabbed the emergency flares from the supply cabinet and lit 3 of them. The brilliant red light filled the cabin, and the whispers stopped. The cold retreated slightly, but I could see shadows moving outside the windows, shapes that weren't quite human, circling the building like wolves testing a fence. They stayed until dawn. Susan returned the next morning with more equipment and news that made my blood run cold. She'd been researching similar incidents across Appalachian bog systems. Over the past 50 years, dozens of hikers and researchers had disappeared in high-elevation wetlands. The few survivors described the same things: sudden temperature drops, electronic failures, and shadows that moved without light. "They're expanding," Susan said, "moving into new territories. Whatever contained them before isn't working anymore." That's when we found the first body. A hiker had gone missing 3 weeks earlier in a bog about 10 miles north. Search and rescue never found him, but our thermal cameras picked up a heat signature in the deep bog. Faint, barely registering, but human-shaped. We found him standing upright in chest-deep bog water, perfectly preserved by the cold and acid. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His skin was gray-white, like he'd been frozen from the inside out. But the worst part was his expression. He looked peaceful, like he'd welcomed what killed him. They're collecting them, Suzette whispered. Keeping them as trophies? Food stores? Mary Crow shook her head when we described what we'd found. The shadow walkers don't kill quickly, she said. They drain slowly, keeping the victim alive as long as possible. The bog preserves what they don't consume immediately. That night, they came for Mark. Mark was sleeping when they arrived. I was monitoring the cameras from the main room, watching the thermal readings spike and fall in patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat. Susan was outside setting up new sensors, trying to map their movement patterns. The attack came without warning. Every camera failed simultaneously. The temperature plummeted 40 degrees in 10 seconds. Ice formed on every surface, and the whispers started, not from outside this time, but from inside the station. Mark sat up in his bed, but his eyes were wrong. They reflected light like an animal's, and when he spoke, it was in that clicking language. "They're calling me," he said in his normal voice, but underneath it was something else, an echo that sounded like wind through a graveyard. "I need to go to them." He walked toward the door, moving stiffly like he was fighting against his own muscles. I grabbed his arm and felt skin so cold it burned my hand. "Mark, you're not going anywhere." But he was stronger than he should have been. He threw me aside easily and opened the door. The fog poured in like it was alive, and with it came the shadows. 7 figures flowed into the station, not quite solid but real enough to block the light from my emergency flares. They surrounded Mark, and I watched his body temperature drop on the thermal scope, from 98.6 to 95 to 90 to 85. He should have been unconscious. Instead, he smiled. "They're so beautiful," he whispered. "So old. They've been hunting here since before humans learned to make fire." The shadow walkers began to circle, and I felt the cold seeping into my bones. This was how they killed, slowly, draining warmth and life until their victims welcomed death as relief from the freezing. I lit every floss I had, filling the station with brilliant red light. The shadows flickered but didn't retreat. They were too strong here, too focused on their prey. That's when Susan burst through the door with a modified searchlight powered by a truck battery. The intense white beam cut through the fog and shadows like a knife. The shadow walkers recoiled, their forms breaking apart in the light. But they didn't leave. They flowed outside and waited. "They won't give up," Mary Crow said when she arrived with the dawn. "The boy's been marked. They'll follow him wherever he goes, take him eventually." Mark was barely conscious, his body temperature hovering at 89 degrees despite the heaters we'd brought in. His skin had a gray tint, and his pulse was slow and weak. "There's one way to break the bond," Mary said reluctantly. "But it requires going to the heart of their territory, the old feeding ground where the spirit barriers were first built." She explained the ritual: Cherokee tobacco offerings and sacred stones arranged in specific patterns. If we could restore even one of the original barriers, it might contain the shadow walkers again, at least temporarily. "But someone has to carry the stones to the center of the bog," Mary warned. "And the shadow walkers will do everything they can to stop you." Susan volunteered immediately. "I have the portable lights, military-grade equipment. I can make it." But as we prepared for the ritual, Mark grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "They showed me something," he whispered. "In the bog, bodies under the water, hundreds of them. People who've been missing for decades, all preserved, all still aware." His eyes focused on me with desperate clarity. "Don't let them take me there, Jennifer. Whatever happens, don't let me become one of those things." That night, we went into the bog to face the shadow walkers on their own ground. The ceremony had to happen at midnight, in the deepest part of the bog where the Cherokee had originally built their barriers. Mary Crow led us through the ritual preparations while Susan checked her equipment, portable floodlights, backup batteries, and emergency flares. Mark insisted on coming despite his condition. "If I'm the bait they want," he said, "then I should be there when we trap them." The bog at night was a different world. Fog so thick we could barely see 10 feet ahead. Water that reflected our lights like black mirrors. And everywhere, the sense of ancient hunger waiting in the darkness. We found the first sacred stone half buried in moss, exactly where Mary said it would be. The Cherokee had carved symbols into the granite, protection wards against the spirits that hunted in shadow. But the stone had been moved, probably by decades of logging and development, breaking the barrier. As we began the restoration ritual, they came. Not 7 this time. More. The thermal scope showed dozens of heat signatures surrounding us, moving in perfect coordination. They'd called others from across the bog system, gathering for what they sensed would be their last chance to feed. Susan's floodlights carved channels of safety through the darkness, but the shadow walkers were patient. They tested the light barriers, flowing around the edges, looking for gaps in our defenses. The cold was unbearable. Ice formed on our equipment despite the mild October weather. Our breath came out in white clouds so thick they obscured our vision. And through it all, the whispers, hundreds of voices speaking in that ancient clicking language. Mary worked quickly, arranging the sacred stones in patterns her grandfather had taught her. Cherokee tobacco scattered in specific formations, prayers spoken in words that predated European settlement. But the shadow walkers weren't just waiting. They were learning. One of the floodlights failed, its battery drained by the supernatural cold. Immediately, shadows poured through the gap, reaching for Mark with tendrils of living darkness. Susan swung another light toward them, but they were already too close. Mark screamed as the cold hit him. His body temperature plummeted on the thermal scope, 85, 80, 75 degrees. But instead of welcoming death like before, he fought back. "No," he gasped, grabbing one of the emergency flares. "I won't feed you anymore." The flare ignited with brilliant light, and the shadow walker recoiled. But there were too many of them, and our lights were failing one by one. That's when Mary finished the ritual. The restored barrier didn't create a wall or fence. Instead, it established boundaries, spiritual territory that the shadow walkers recognized and respected. The ancient contract between the Cherokee and the spirits, renewed for another generation. The whispers stopped. The cold retreated. And one by one, the thermal signatures faded as the shadow walkers returned to the deep bog where they'd always belonged. Mark collapsed, but his body temperature began to rise. The gray tint faded from his skin. For the first time in weeks, he looked like himself again. "They're still there," Mary warned as we packed up the equipment. "The barriers will hold for now, but they need to be maintained, renewed every few years, or the shadow walkers will break free again." We evacuated the research station the next morning. The official report listed environmental hazards and seasonal access restrictions for the Cranberry Wilderness. No mention of shadow walkers or Cherokee spiritual barriers. But I know the truth. I've seen the thermal images, felt the supernatural cold, watched ancient predators hunt in coordinated packs, and I've learned to respect the wisdom of people who lived with these dangers for thousands of years. Now I work with the Cherokee Nation, helping to identify and maintain spiritual barriers across Appalachian bog systems. Because the shadow walkers aren't unique to Cranberry Wilderness. They're in every high-elevation wetland, waiting for their chance to expand their hunting grounds. Mark recovered completely, though he never returned to wildlife research. Susan published papers on anomalous thermal phenomena in bog ecosystems, carefully avoiding any mention of the supernatural. And Mary Crow continues the work her ancestors started, protecting the boundary between the world of the living and the hunting grounds of the dead. If you're ever camping in bog country and your electronics start failing, if the temperature drops suddenly on a warm night, if you see shadows moving without anything to cast them, get to high ground immediately. Find the brightest light you can and wait for dawn. Because some things that hunt in the darkness have been learning our patterns for thousands of years. And they're always hungry for warmth. The shadow walkers are still there, in the deep bog where the Cherokee contained them, waiting, watching, hunting in dreams until the barriers fail again. And they will fail again. They always do.